and how it started out, and then a middle-aged woman and a teenager and a middle-aged woman, and like you could hear the voice growing up, right? And eventually she's an old woman talking about the end of her life in this little like 1 minute long trailer. And so I pitched to, I can't remember what it's called, voices.com or voices123 for voice actors, and I got inundated with responses, people giving me free examples of them reading my script, right? And I listened to a bunch of them, and some of them are kind of amazing for what they were. It's like, oh, somebody who just did this for free, to pitch to me. But then as I listened to them, I was like, oh, this just doesn't sound right. Like I just can't, like I'm not good enough as a director of actors to pull this off. And as I'd listen to some of them over and over, I'd be like, well, maybe this is good. I've listened to it too many times now. I can't even tell.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that it's really like we're not those people.
Well, you're coming across as a very
we're not Pixar. Like Pixar workshops the heck out of their stuff. They take it back to the drawing board over and over. They have this like I can't remember the name of the story trust or the brain trust, right? And everybody who's working on a film inside Pixar has to bring it before the brain trust, and they pick it apart, all the little narrative elements, any part that feels a little slow or doesn't make sense or doesn't feel emotionally motivated, or and they go back to the drawing board sometimes with projects that they're years into, right? Like Good Dinosaur, like they just kept reworking that thing, and it never really, but they knew that wasn't quite right? They reworked it, and they just couldn't get it right. So but those are the best storytellers in the world, and we don't have those people. They're not working in the industry. They're working at Pixar. They're not.
We don't have access to that.
The people who are directing the voice actors for a Pixar film. They got Holly Hunter. We don't have Holly Hunter. Elastigirl, right? Like, we don't have a voice like that, right? So we have these people who aren't good enough to be in movies, or else they'd be in movies, right? Because the pay is better, and so we're on the bottom rung as far as this stuff goes. We are not on the bottom rung as far as like amazing emergent systems go, though, right? Like we blow those movies out of the water in that department, right? So a game like Noita, it's firing on all cylinders. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing that makes you cringe a little bit or makes you feel like, oh, that could have been done better. It's like, this is it. Like, this is like a game, and it's like it's the stuff. It's the way it should be, right? And so when we're trying to do that other stuff, though, very often we stumble into this territory where it's like,
but like you're coming across a point that I think a lot of artists or indie developer simply ignore, right? We're making an entertaining product at the end of it, and that needs to factor in as part of the game design, because I think people have a natural inclination is like, here's a fistful of money, go make the game you've always wanted to make, and we just go heads down and make that game, but without really addressing the marketing changes and atmosphere of like, realistically, can it sustain itself as a product, but also is it worth a damn that anybody else cares? And that's where art kind of limits itself for the sake of art. It's like, no, you're still making a thing that people want to buy, so you got to factor that in as part of it.
And I think that's really important. I think people tend to discount that, or they tend to say like, oh, I wish it wasn't this way. Why do we have to worry about what's going to sell? But I think for me as a creator, someone who's been trying to make, aesthetically complex and artistically relevant, supposedly artistically relevant work for my entire career, I think that kind of grounding is really important. We're not just operating in a bubble. I'm not making gallery art, for some curator or something that no one's going to look at and no one cares about. I'm like because I'm making a commercial product, like it has to be good. Right? I can't fool myself into thinking that my bad stuff is good, right? And go a whole career making stuff that at the end of the day no one really likes and doesn't really, it's like there's a certain like the rubber is hitting the road here because I'm supporting my family doing this, and it also motivates me to keep going. It also motivates me to keep making games. It motivates me to innovate. It motivates me to innovate in ways that are actually interesting to people, as opposed to innovating in the sort of vacuum or something, right? And so I know a lot of people who are supported by like professorships, or who are supported by, they go out to seek grants because they're like working as sort of gallery artists or new media artists or something. And some of them are making games that literally 30 or 40 people ever play. right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they don't even exist. Like they're not online anywhere because they were part of an installation or something,
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, it's like what I don't know. I think making commercially viable art, which is what independent rock bands and stuff are doing as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's what people who are making movies and TV are doing as well. Those things that I don't think that ends up being a barrier to making great work. In fact, I think it's probably where the greatest work is actually being done. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, like Martin Scorsese in the 70s, 80s, 70s and 80s and 90s was making way greater works of moving images than I can't even name some of these people, but the gallery installation video artists, right?
Right.
Where
No, definitely.
Where they show like a video of some guy falling into a pool over and over or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you go and stand in front of it for 30 seconds and you kind of get your fill of it and you kind of feel a little bored and then you move on, right? It's like, no one's going to pay for that except for a collector, and the collector's going to pay enough for it that it doesn't matter that no one else will willing to pay for it. No one would pay $5 for it if it was made for bulk consumption. But all these people just had to go see. If you were interested in film back in that era, and I'm not even sure what year this came out, but you had to go see Goodfellas and you had to go see Casino, right? It's just like not, if you're a film person, those movies are incredibly relevant to you. And they sold tickets, right? But they were really complex, groundbreaking artistic achievements on top of everything else, right? So it's like, I think it's possible and even important to be factoring those things in. And when if the audience is really not interested in the short narrative kind of thing, or you make a short narrative thing and maybe they're interested in some but not others, and then at the end really you have to acknowledge maybe the thing I made wasn't that good. Maybe that's the answer. Like that's always my first inclination. I always try to avoid blaming other factors. The timing wasn't right. I didn't have the right. The press didn't like it. The press didn't understand it. Blah blah blah. It's like, no, what I made probably wasn't good. That's probably the most obvious piece of evidence. Like the most obvious causal thing, right? So when first step, doubt yourself. I see so many people when something flops giving 101 reasons why it flopped. It's like, no, it probably wasn't a great game. That's probably it. And so I've had things that didn't do as well as I thought they would or whatever. And it was always because they weren't good enough. Right. So, people have a way to find people, even if you don't get press coverage and even if people don't, it's like, if something's really, really good, it's hard to keep it a secret.
Right. The quality products have long legs. It just shows over and over again that at some point someone will discover the genius of it. One will be wanting to tell someone, and that's essentially what you were talking about at the very beginning of the episode. You were just saying that word of mouth is still king, and kind of harking back with all these avenues now for indie developers that we have so many choices now that we kind of long for curation, but not really. Those days are, again, you're a gatekeeper that decides whether or not certain games can make it, which is not exactly the best democratic way of like the best product being out there in front of people. But at least now we have so few resources as indie developers that the indie Oculus, the way it affects us is mostly because we're more on our own than ever before. But if you can survive this type of thing, you can survive any change in the audience consumption, right? As long as you know how to market yourself and make a quality product and be able to put it out in front of people, that no matter wherever we start streaming games or whatever platform that changes, it shouldn't affect the success of your game. You're just adapting.
I think there's something interesting going on here where there's also this sort of pressure to innovate in a way, right? Because innovation helps you stand out and gives people something to talk about. And so if your game doesn't really innovate that much, then there's much less to talk about, much less kind of buzz that can build up around it, much less forehead slapping when people hear about your game and or see it on YouTube or whatever. And so I think that is probably a positive thing, right? Where if you make just another roguelike platformer, people are gonna be like, another roguelike platformer. What are we gonna say about it, right? Maybe it's even a really good one, but it's not that, it doesn't do anything new. Whereas like if you make a roguelike platformer where every pixel is simulated material that's fully interactive, people are like, what? I've never seen a moving screen, a GIF that looks like that, right? like the whole level's on fire. Like what? Which is Noita, right? And so I think, for 1 Hour in Life, all of my games have been innovative in some way or another, and oftentimes that has served me very well in terms of marketing or catching on with people, right? Like, the Castle Doctrine was a game where every player builds a security system, and then you go out and try and break through the security systems of other players. Like that little elevator pitch is like, what? Oh my gosh! Like everyone says instantly, "Wow, that's crazy! That sounds cool." Right? And when I came up with the idea, I frantically ran to Google to make sure there were no multiplayer burglary games, and I was like, "Oh, I'm the first one to have thought. I can't believe I'm the first one to have thought of this. This seems so like obvious." And then after the Castle Doctrine came out, all these people came up to me, other friends and game developers, like, I was working on exactly the same thing. We never got it to work though, so we never released it, or you beat me to it, or whatever. Like it was just this idea that was just waiting to happen, right? And when someone hears about it, it seems so interesting and obvious. Like an obviously interesting thing to try playing that everyone is like, ooh, I want to try that, right? 1 Hour in Life as well. It's like, oh, very simple core idea. Multiplayer online survival game where when you join the game, you're born as a helpless baby to another player who's chosen randomly as your mother. And, instantly when people hear that, even people who don't play games, their gears start turning, right? They're like, oh, what? What's going to happen then? What if she doesn't take care of you? What if she's mean to you? What if she does this to you? And like, yeah, that's what the game's about. Exactly. Isn't that interesting? And they're like, oh yeah. So, that kind of, then if we compare that to, to pick on Overland again, it's like Overland's a post-apocalyptic game in this beautiful little 2D diorama, diorama scenes, but it's kind of a turn-based strategy game where you gather resources and decide what your units are and decide when to spend resources and so on. And it's procedurally generated and kind of roguelike, but there's not a conceptual hook, right? I just described it to you the best way that I can. I can't really say anything else. I can't sum it up in some way that's like a lightning bolt in your mind that gets your gears turning. You're like, I've kind of played games like that. Maybe I've never played one that looked as cool as this one looks. It does look really amazing visually. Maybe I've never played one with dogs. Or there's a couple of little cool things about it that are like, ooh, there's dogs in it, or ooh, this, you're gonna have to abandon some of your people, and you can't keep everyone alive. Ooh, that's kind of like Fire Emblem, but there's not a punch on the heart or the head, right?
Yeah.
And No Man's Sky also exactly the same thing, right? This infinite simulated procedurally generated universe where every planet is different and you can go wherever you want. Right, that's my elevator pitch for the game, and everyone's head just explodes when they hear that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that in order to stand out among the 40 games that come out on Steam every day, in order to get people talking about your game, in order to make your game worthy of making YouTube videos about, and all the other things, like being that innovative is important, and I think that's really healthy. I think that pushes us and challenges us to not just status quo. I think another example is FTL versus Into the Breach, which was the next game. And Into the Breach was a big success, kind of riding on the coattails of FTL. But I think even if you go now, there's more people playing FTL than Into the Breach at this moment, right? FTL is like 10 years old or something. And you talk to the guys at the company, they were like, yeah, this game was really successful, but not as big as FTL. But even that's a simple, it's like, Into the Breach is just not, FTL is like nothing else. There'd never been anything quite like that before. And it was really like, oh wait, there's this like crew and you're on a spaceship and you're running around from room to room of the spaceship and, and deciding what to do. And part of the spaceship's on fire. It's like, there's something like so new about it. Right. And Into the Breach was just more like, oh, it's a turn-based kind of isometric strategy game. So yeah, I think that it just doesn't capture and then like grab people in the same way. Right.
Right. And I think you're actually maybe discovering the reason why a lot of these games don't work, which is it always starts with the elevator pitch and then like extrapolating that and making people wanting to know more and be curious about what you're going to say next about the game. So like getting them hooked initially is very important, and getting them to ask questions and kind of shoot off ideas and get them excited is the seed to making it buzzworthy. And as an indie industry, right, this is where the old ways kind of would have helped or could be helping smaller developers, is that the combination of the gatekeeper of getting financial people to put money behind your game is getting through that initial pitch, making it sound like people who don't give a damn to finally give a damn. There is something to that process that is largely missing, because now that we have so much access to kind of have an idea, put our game out there and self-publish, we're not needing those gatekeepers there to kind of express ourselves freely, but also we are missing that element of testing the idea against.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point.
Professionals.
So in the old days, what would happen is you'd kind of make your game and then Steam would shoot it down and it wouldn't go on Steam. It wasn't good enough because it wasn't innovative enough, because it wasn't interesting enough. And you would just kind of go back with your tail between your legs and blame Steam for why your game didn't sell. Right. Now you're like, oh, sure, $100, I'll put it on Steam. And my game didn't sell. Oh, what's going wrong now? There has to be some other reason. Like, it's like, so, and also if you needed to get a publisher behind you, even earlier days, right? I mean, there was an indie industry of boxed games back before Steam, right? I don't really know. I mean, people were buying, like, Aquaria, I think, was being sold on the website, on its own website, and it wasn't on. I think it was before Steam existed, but or like Gish, right? I mean, I think Gish was something that eventually made it into boxes on retail shelves somewhere. So you have to get a company behind what you're doing with money, and so you are kind of being vetted there. And now people are just, you're right, they're left to their own devices, and then they're all expecting these amazing results from something that most people will tell them this isn't that amazing. Yeah. Now, in terms of elevator pitches, that's an interesting thing, because it's like, okay, maybe some games are amenable to that, right? Like 1 Hour One Life, you can sum it up in one sentence in a way that gets people interested. Castle Doctrine as well, Noita as well, right? But there's other games that are very good and maybe very innovative, but innovative in a sort of a more diffuse way, right? And so then how do you pitch that, right? Like, how do you pitch What Remains of Edith Finch, which is really innovative, but in this, you can't really, it's not innovative in a one-liner, like, I can't, it's a narrative game with all these different kind of completely different narrative gameplay things and new mechanics that are stitched together, in a wacky house. I mean, it's like, and the other one is the Stanley Parable, right? It's like, it's kind of has to be experienced to really understand what's interesting about it. And so that game is sort of unpitchable in a way, right? But games that are as good as those two games are sell themselves through word of mouth during the brief interval anyway, right? So, I don't know. Have you ever? So I'm assuming you played the Stanley Parable, right?
Yeah, I played it.
Did you ever play the Stanley Parable demo?
No.
Most people haven't.
Yeah.
And it's really, I highly recommend it. It's free, of course, but when you go to play, it's like, what's the Stanley Parable demo? How do you make a demo for this game that is so singular and just has to be experienced to even be understood at all, right? Like, how do you pitch it to potential customers? The Stanley Parable demo is a completely separate game that has nothing to do with the Stanley Parable.
So it's
the best game demo ever. It's actually maybe it's better than the Stanley Parable.
Oh wow.
I highly recommend it. So anyway, so that is like an example of, like, it's so singular that you can't even make a demo of it. You can't really even explain it to people. Even if you showed a trailer or shot, it's like, it just has to be experienced, right? Because it's about the gag, right? It's like the gag is what you're experiencing. That's or it's not really a gag. I don't want to simplify it that way, but the aesthetic space that it places you in is the whole point, right? And so,
well, that would be the marketing pitch. And it's like, it's just something you got to experience. Like, I wouldn't talk about the game. Yeah, it's like, you got to do it. Everyone's talking about it. Yeah. I like to would want to move the conversation. You kind of touched this a bit, how the old ways of doing things, kind of staying with that theme where we relied so much on the press junket to kind of promote, to have the day one sale to kind of determine the fate of our games, right? How that is changing. And I think I've read an article about you kind of highlighting how streaming and playing your game or other avenues for people to experience your game before purchasing is doing a lot better for people to actually decide on buying your game. Right. Can you expand on that a bit? Because I didn't realize it until I actually read through it and listening to you that, yeah, it's pretty much true. I mean, I read it just for the fun of it about like how this game is, but it doesn't really entice me to like buy now, or even if the guy strongly recommends me to buy, it's like, yeah, whatever. It's not as strong as a recommendation as before. And I guess where are they catering to? Obviously, their website is still an ecosystem for their readers where they stay within, right? It seems more like a Twitter thing. People don't click on links or anything, right?
Well, you're asking like who? So if people who buy games don't read these articles, which they obviously don't, because the articles have no impact on sales, it seems.
Right.
I mean, another quick example is like, and this should be obvious to everybody, but like I've had my games covered on National Public Radio 3 times now.
Oh, wow.
And including 1 Hour, One Life, right? So on the day when it goes live nationally, this was on the show, it's the show To the Best of Our Knowledge, right? So I'm on a 10-minute segment where I'm being interviewed about my game, which I think, so I did one about Passage. Of course, that wasn't even being sold. I did another one about Cordial Minuet, which was available for people to deposit money into at the time. And I did another one about 1 Hour, One Life. So when the day that goes live nationwide, you do not generally see even a spike in web traffic on your game's website, right? Because people who listen to NPR obviously generally don't play video games or go out on websites to find out more about video games. They're fascinated by the idea. They want to hear about it. Yeah. They're fascinated by the story and this developer and his interesting idea and whatever, but they are not going to go buy a game. Similarly, I was in, the in-flight magazine Hemispheres, I think it's called, on United Airlines, or I can't remember which airline it's on. When you're in the in-flight magazine, you're there in the seat back pocket for like a whole month, right? So it was this big, profile about me and my family and about Diamond Trust of London and everything. And I've had so many people come up to me within the next year or two saying, I recognize you from somewhere when I meet them for the first time or something. Like, I think I saw you in some mag. Yeah, because pretty much everybody's bored on the flight and they all read the damn magazine, even though it's an awful magazine. Really, it's one of the worst magazines. In terms of like, oh, these articles are so short and they ask such dumb questions in the interviews, and but everybody who ever flew that month, saw this thing and got a taste and read my profile, right? Now, none of them play video games. None of them went out and bought Diamond Trust of London or whatever was being talked about in the article, but they all saw it and absorbed it, right? And so I think that that's obvious, right? So then we get over to the gaming press, which used to be the place that people went when they wanted to figure out what game to play. They used to go and read these reviews. They used to go and be, watching Rock Paper Shotgun or Kotaku or whatever to talk about what interesting games are coming out. I mean, Kotaku covered one of my old indie games back in the day, like Gravitation or something. It would just be this deluge of traffic coming to try the game. Right? Or when they covered some of my games that were for sale back in the day, it would be this like deluge of people buying the game that day. But that's not the case anymore. So what's going on there? I think that the reality is that the gaming press has actually been kind of gutted financially. That the audience has kind of dried up, that they're kind of in a lot of them are operating skeleton crews, of people barely getting paid. You write to some guy who covers games and you're like, you want to cover this, and he's got to go beg for funding from somebody to be able to write about it, right? And then he'll come back and say, oh, my editor doesn't have that, and he's not willing to pay me to write about this right now. Because they just don't have, like, the advertising dollars aren't there like they used to be. Everything's kind of the whole landscape has changed. It's still there. I mean, a lot of the websites are gone, right? Wasn't there one called One Up?
Yeah.
And there's a couple more like that are completely gone. And then a lot of the other ones are kind of run by like a fan community, or like, you know, I don't know, it kind of feels like Destructoid. A lot of those articles are written for free, maybe.
Yeah.
And so, you know, where these things used to be like these hubs of the gaming world, or hubs of game communities. I think that there's still the appearance of it operating the way it used to, but I think the numbers are way, way lower in terms of readership, in terms of engagement, in terms of what authors are being paid. Most of the better writers in games have left game writing, right? I mean, almost all the people I know who used to write about games and were really good writers now do something else. They're all, you know, doing PR consulting or working on game development themselves or whatever, right? So it's like, what's left are these kind of people who are kind of enthusiasts, and maybe they're barely scraping by. I mean, some of them will tell me if I ask them personally, "Oh yeah, our website is still doing great." It's like, really? How come there's only 2 comments on every article? Like, what?
Right. It's true. Yeah.
So I think that's just, yeah, and I think, and nobody likes to talk about this, but I may be tarred and feathered for saying this, but I think it has something to do with Gamergate as well. I think that there was a kind of in a lot of ways, I think at least a good portion of the gaming populace felt like these websites kind of got caught with their pants down in terms of, and this is 100, you know, and I have experienced this myself, right? Because they were covering things not because they were good, but because they were friends with the people, right? Or they had a previous relationship with these people from previous games. And they did that for me all the time, right? Like, oh, you covered Passage, you covered Gravitation. Well, here's my new game. And they'd instantly write back and instantly cover it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was like pre-Gamergate, like I went to Kotaku to show Cordial Minuet, which is a pretty obscure idea, right? This like grid of numbers. It looks kind of like a bingo card where you're playing for real money against another person and outguessing them. I went to the New York City offices of Kotaku and showed Stephen Totillo the game. You know, I showed it to him for like 20, 30 minutes, right? And we played a couple games against each other. I don't even think it had finished artwork in it. I think it was just a plain grid of numbers. He wrote this like, must have been like a 20-page long. It was like the longest Kotaku article I've ever seen, right? You keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. All these screenshots, all this discussion of the details of the strategy and everything, right? Like that kind of article won't be written today, right?
Right.
And he did that in part because he had been following my career and he knew my stuff. You know, it's like I had my foot in the door. I could email him and go into the offices and show him this thing.
Yeah.
And I think that people kind of got wise to that and realized that people inside the game industry, journalism industry, were either covering their friends' games or games of people they were fans of,
right?
Without merit, right? Or they were covering games that had some kind of political agenda that they were on board with. And so I think that people just kind of this is, and I'd see it too. Also, whenever my games were covered, my games often have some kind of little edge to them or something, and there'd always be a political comment in the coverage. Right? Like the choice of not allowing men to have babies in this game is a controversial one. You know, it's like,
it's science.
But you know, this is definitely going to ruffle some feathers.
Sure.
Or using the word problematic to describe the design choice that I made, right? So anyway, I saw that happen a bunch of times where it was clear that the people covering the games had some kind of political agenda or were trying to paint me in some kind of negative political light, right? And so that was all pre-Gamergate, right? So I kind of witnessed this firsthand, and I was the beneficiary of it. You know, it's like I'm guilty as charged. Yes, I used to email my friends, and not friends. I mean, I didn't know them from outside of journalism, but I'd email people that had interviewed me and become friendly with me to get coverage, right?
Right.
And so they don't do that anymore, by the way, for the most part. When I email them, even if I've known them for years, they don't even write back.
Not allowed.
So, well, I don't know. Or they're too busy, or they don't care about indie games. I mean, a lot of them don't cover independent games anymore in the same way that they used to.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, trying to get people to cover 1 Hour in Life, which was this, you know, easily coverable game because it's so weird. There's so much interesting stuff to talk about. Was like pulling teeth. I'd write back to them over and over and over again, and they'd finally come back and say, no, not at this time. You know, it's like, okay, this is definitely the most press-worthy and interesting game I've ever worked on, right? It's also my most successful by like, you know, factor of 4 financially, right? So like, you know, there's one guy who's made like 3 YouTube videos a week for 18 months.
Oh, wow.
His whole channel is, nothing but, 3,000 view, or more, every, he has a pretty big audience, and he pretty much covers nothing but 1 hour in life. So clearly there's stuff to talk about there. There's stuff worthy of, but like, still, like, Polygon has never covered it. Kotaku has never covered it. I think PC Gamer marginally covered it, and Rock Paper Shotgun covered it. But it's just like, yeah, okay, Polygon's not going to cover 1 hour in life. Okay.
So it sounds to me, man, like the future is not exactly that. It's a different type of coverage. It's evolving, right? Now it's where it used to be about press junkets and people writing articles, and now we're aiming it more towards streamers and people. And it's actually more research should be done towards people who are doing this and streaming your game, to ask them, like, what exactly are the type of content that you like to stream, like what resonates with your audience, and thinking along those lines to make it more of a long tail for your game. It seems it's just like the shift is towards those people more than people writing articles. Something else
interesting to talk about there, which is that I've seen giant streamers cover 1 hour in life, right? Somebody emailed me on the weekend like, dude, Lyric is streaming 1 hour in life at this moment. Holy crap. And you go and look, and you're just like, yeah, there's 30,000 people watching 1 hour in life at this moment. And in that case, I remember specifically, there was like no jump in, no
spikes.
No spikes that day. Other people, like when C's covered the game one time or just played it on a stream, there was this pretty big spike that day. But then he played it the next day, and the spike didn't continue, right? Like when Dragast first covered the game on his YouTube channel, there was this huge bump in sales, but as he continued to cover it, that it didn't continue, right? So it's like there's this idea that, first of all, certain people buy games and certain other ones don't. And people who tend to watch Twitch streams, for the most part, I definitely was seeing way bigger spikes in the beginning when some big YouTuber would cover the game than when some big Twitch streamer would cover the game. Because it's like people who are watching Twitch are not there to figure out what game to buy. They're
just killing time. Yeah,
they're killing time. Well, we can. Well, yeah.
I don't want to hurt feelings. Yeah,
they're there as a form of relaxation and passive entertainment, and they also really want to be part of this little community, and in some cases, big community of people who are chatting on the sidebar. And they want to get recognized by the celebrity that they become enamored with, who is the streamer, right?
Yeah, that's the product.
They want to get Seeds to shout out to them or whatever. Yeah. They want to hear Lyric's funny jokes or whatever he's going to say about, vaginas or whatever in 1 hour in life.
Yeah.
That they want to be there for that, and they're there because of the personality more than the game. And they're not shopping. They're not like looking for. But people who are on YouTube are more like, I'm trying to figure out what game to play. Let's watch a let's play of it a little bit, until you saturate each streamer or YouTuber's audience, and you get all the people in that audience who are in the market for buying your game potentially, and then it trails off, right, in terms of the impact of each new video, right? So it's like each of these YouTubers has a different audience, and the audiences don't necessarily overlap. And in each audience, there's some subset of people who are the types of people who actually buy your game. And once your game has been shown to those people, it's kind of over, right? You can keep going back to the same streamer and be like, hey, you want to cover my game again? And even if they do, it doesn't really necessarily do anything, right?
Right.
So that's interesting. The other interesting thing is kind of related to this is that despite all this crazy coverage that you get in all these different places, where you have obviously hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions I think the top video for 1 hour life has, some YouTuber made has over 1 million views, right? So millions of people have seen something about 1 hour in life. When I was at Penny Arcade Expo having my booth, this was just a couple of weeks ago, the vast majority of people who came to the booth had never even heard of the game.
Right.
Which was weird, right? I'm at a game fan conference where everybody there is like a diehard game player who's walking around trying to play their favorite games and spends a lot of their time thinking about games and reading about games and watching streams about games and everything. And despite all the coverage, and 1 hour in life has gotten, way more kind of coverage and attention. And, day to day, if I'm walking around and I talk to some kid who plays games, and I mention that I make games like in my neighborhood or something, they'll be like, what game? And I'll describe it. Like, I saw that on YouTube. Oh my gosh. So, there is some, penetration into these other kind of realms of existence outside of just my fans or something. They probably don't own the game, but all these people came up to the booth and they're like, I've never heard of this game. You explain it to me. And I'd explain it to them, and give them the elevator pitch about being born as a helpless baby or whatever. And Chris Hecker has this old adage that he always tells independent developers, which is, nobody knows about your game.
Yeah.
How much coverage you think you've gotten or whatever, nobody knows about your game, right? Nobody's heard of it. So always know that there's just as however many people you think have heard about your game and been exposed to it, there's this huge
100 times that don't care.
Well, no, they don't care. Not that they don't care. They just haven't even had a chance to hear.
Yeah. Right.
And so that is true. And so I think that with each of these new streamers and new YouTubers and kind of there's a different segment of the audience that hasn't, because the people who watch C's people who watch C's don't watch Lyric, and the people who watch Lyric don't watch Dragast, and the people who watch Dragast, PewDiePie has his own cadre of people, and each of these people has a following, right? I don't know. I think that there's also, something to be said there about which people in those groups are actually in the market for buying games and which are just sort of killing time or just entertaining themselves by watching games. So another interesting thing is that it's in the middle of my second month, I had this huge spike. So I was going along like $2,000 a day or something in the second month, right? And then all of a sudden one day it was like $8,000 in one day, and then went back to normal. And I was like, what is this? And I was looking at the graphs, trying to figure it out. And then I moused over and I was like, oh, wait a minute, that's Christmas Day. So that's the day when all these kids who have no credit cards get their Steam gift cards in their stockings.
Right.
And they've been hearing for the past month, because the game came out in November, about this game, and they've been waiting to buy it. Right. And so, it's weird. You wouldn't think Christmas Day is like a day when people
buy stuff,
buying stuff at all. Right. But they're buying video games.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And so that's another thing to think about. Right. It's like that there is this, as we get older, we tend to forget this, but people my age don't buy games anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm not really, yes, people my age do appreciate the game I'm making and kind of talk about it and think about it. But most of them, even if they buy it because they want to support it or they just want to try it, they play it for a couple of hours. I'm like, oh, I had my great experience with 1 Hour in Life. Thank you, Jason. And they're done. Right.
Yeah.
So, the people who are really playing games are like my son, my 16-year-old son, and people younger than him. Right. And there's so many barriers in their way in terms of actually getting a game, right? Like to them, we get these emails from people who can't get the game working for one reason or another occasionally, right? And they're so heartbroken. They're like, sometimes it's from the person's mother. I've been trying to get my son to install on Windows 10 for the past hour, and he's in tears. He's been wanting to play the game so long, he's so disappointed. Yeah. Or I've saved up my birthday money for months, and I finally this is the one game I can afford to buy, right? So it's hard to kind of have that perspective from our point of view as for me as an adult with 3 kids and a spouse, and I'm supporting a family. I never really have to think twice if I want to buy a game, right?
Right.
I have the budget as part of my business expenses for research purposes and so on. It's just I don't buy that many games, but I never I can't afford that. I got to save up for it. Right. So a lot of these people are looking for the biggest bang for their buck because they can only buy one game for the next several months. Right. And so they're kicking the tires of every game. They're watching all these YouTube videos, trying to figure out which is going to be the best investment, because they're not just going to go spend $20 to try something. They're basically spending $20 to join a player community. Right. And to become not somebody who has tried 1 Hour in Life, but somebody who plays 1 Hour in Life. They're looking for the next Discord to sync into, and the next forums to be part of, and then the next thing that's going to kind of be their game for a while, right? What are you currently playing? It's kind of like asking somebody what are you reading these days or something. It's like, what are you currently playing? I've been playing Subnautica and you talk to people, they've been playing Subnautica, for the past month. That's their game currently, right? Or they're currently into this game 1 Hour in Life, or they're currently playing Factorio, or they're currently, syncing into Noita, or whatever they're doing, right? And so that is kind of the way people are thinking about games now. And this next generation, we've forgotten what it's like. I mean, I remember saving my pennies. I mean, everything's totally different, right? So we can't compare, but when I knew Super Mario 3 was coming out and I had my gosh, it must have been $50 saved up. And I couldn't find a store that actually had it in stock because it was selling out everywhere, right? And I was like calling Toys R Us every day to see if it came in yet. And finally it came in one day, and my mom couldn't take me there that day, even though I had the money. It's like I was calling my friend's mom to see if she could take me to Toys R Us that day because they've got one copy of Super Mario 3. But that was like something that was like an event, right? And so remembering putting ourselves back in that mindset of like the majority of our audience, like a game purchase is this event, right? And so if you think about it that way, then, and I think maybe what had happened with, the Gone Home successes and the short narrative game successes like 5 years ago was that there was still an audience of people who had disposable income and we're still playing games. And I think like a lot of those people have gotten older and don't anymore or something.
Yeah, we have distractions now. So I got real life problems than to sit around and play.
So then we're left with the people who have always been playing games, and those types of people are not at all interested in plunking down $15 on something that's going to be over in 2 hours, right?
Well, Jason, we are at that 1 hour mark, and dude, we need to definitely follow up with a part 2 on this, because this is a topic that is the whole seed of this podcast is about. It's just understanding the market and being able to go out there and promote great quality products and be successful at it. And I wanted to thank you for your time. And this is part of the podcast where I hand the mic over to you to self-promote, give attention to, shout out to anybody out there. And it is all yours. I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah. So I've got a lot of games on my website, but the one I'm currently working on is 1 Hour One Life. And you can find that on Steam or on my own website. You just do a search for 1 Hour One Life. Right after I get off the mic here, I'm going to go put out the update for the week, because I've been updating it weekly for the past 18 months.
That's awesome.
So yeah, you can get on board with the latest update. And that's all I'm going to pitch, I guess. That's kind of my life right now.
That's awesome, man. Thanks again, Jason. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I'm serious. I'm going to follow up with you with other stuff. It was truly enlightening. I learned a lot. And I want to thank you again.
The other thing I'll mention is there's the talk I gave at GDC, which was back in March of 2019. It's called 2014 versus 2000, or 2000 something versus 2000 something. Financial success before and after the indie apocalypse. So if you look up like Jason Rohr GDC talk on YouTube, you can watch that whole thing. And there's all sorts of graphs and analysis and in-depth stuff. So that is kind of an adjunct or appendix to this talk, or to this podcast.
We're definitely going to link that into the video description as well as the audio podcast for people to find that talk. That's how I found you, and I found it very interesting as well. And people really do need to dig into this and take control of their own success. So thank you again. And that ends today's podcast. Thank you, everyone. You gotta work out the mics a bit. Thank you, everybody. Again, that was a pre-recorded interview that we had with Jason about the indie apocalypse, and I feel like that was a very relevant topic that everybody's been wondering lately, especially if you have a game or project that you're about to launch and you are looking at the landscape. If you grew up the same time era that I have during the PS2 era, the traditional route of going to press and kind of putting your game in front of those people slowly has been done. It's a little tougher sell. Most people, if you just think back looking at press junkets or any go-to news article site that you go to, really doesn't lead to sales as much as we used to. When was the last review that you looked at that compelled you to go ahead and purchase that particular game? Exactly. So the indie apocalypse, if anything, is the encompass of changing tides, of a different way of thinking, of how to put your projects out there, how to leverage streaming, as well as how to commute and create a community around your product before launch to fully embrace that product. So at some point, Jason, probably the next GDUX, will give us a live lecture more on that topic. but for now we have him in recording spirit. But again, thank you everybody for joining us. We are sponsored. Let's go ahead and do that real quick. We do have our next speaker ready to go, Kim Chan. But before we get him on, let me kind of go through this and let you know how it was possible to bring this conference here to you today. So we are sponsored by Perforce and Unity. What is that tag at the bottom? Let's take that off. Bam. So Perforce is, again, a version control software. So if you have a project, big or small, that you would like to have a file history of, you would want to use Perforce. So you want to work with your team with this software to bring and be updated and without losing any of your hard-earned work through file versioning history. You want to go to perforce.com, download that software. You can go and work with a team of 5 for free and start utilizing and understanding why everybody in the industry is using Perforce. If you are an independent developer or you're working at a AAA studio, you want to think about Unity. Unity is the leading graphics engine for everybody out there that is free to use, easy to use, and is just means quality. I mean, honestly, they're top brass for a reason. And if you're working within mobile to independent to AAA, you want to go to unity.com and get on the wagon, man. Everyone's on it right now. And of course, I want to kind of briefly talk about our partner for this conference. So let me throw that up for you guys real quick. Oh, my mouse is part of... Oh, you love that music, right? That's part of the live thing. So you guys want to go to Indie Game Business. We are partnered with them. So this is a 5 days independent games week where we are providing 3 days of live conferencing from speakers all over the world to give you the best topics and best insight of what's going on and how to win as a game developer. The last 2 days, Thursdays and Fridays, is contributed to Indie Game Business. Go over to gdux.me, actually, gdux.me, to get 50% out discount to this conference where you can connect with publishers and anybody looking to get financing for their projects and do it in the comforts of your home, on your seat and ready to go. So if you want that 50% discount, which is available on gdux.me, click on the logo that we're partnered with here, and you can go ahead and use that discount. If you want to go straight to it, go to indiegamebusiness.com, use the code Game Dev Unchained to allow you to have that access for Thursday and Friday. So that pretty much covers everything. So without further ado, the next topic, and I will need to kind of reference this real quick, is we were talking about the Indie-ocalypse, but this topic is particularly talking about surviving the artist apocalypse. So going through the industry and what the podcast is about, it's something that has been pretty prevalent. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, Kim Chan.
How's it going?
Hey, Kim.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I do hear you.
Okay.
Yes. So I'm going to switch over to you and let you introduce yourself to our audience here too. So Kim, you've been on the podcast several times as well as our Games Go Online show. Can you give a little background before we get started of who you are, where you're at, where you're heading?
Where do you want me to start? Because I've been basically working as an artist in the entertainment field for about 15, 16 years, maybe 17. I don't know, a long time at this point. Kind of losing track of exactly how many years, but yeah, and in a number of industries. I worked in film, I worked in games, animation, dabbled in theme parks, comics, some movie poster development, toys, and yeah, kind of covered a wide spectrum of industries as an artist. So Does that is that what you're looking for, or do you want you want me to dive down in more specifics, or?
No, that suffices, man. So, yeah, I mean, you definitely been in the industry for a long time, and I wanted to appreciate the different types of industries that you've been in. I think you're one of the few friends and colleagues that I've had that pretty much touch, I think, every types of medium and expressions of art in other industries that utilizes your particular skill.
Right.
Can you expand that on that bit where we're talking? He's being a little modest. He's been in the industry over 20 years now. Been around.
Yeah,
15 years?
around that. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like my first I guess major gig was Lucasfilm. I worked directly with George Lucas for 3 years, and then we moved on to work with Doug Chang on a few things, eventually getting me onto Rogue One. So I worked in a number of film projects, and then transitioned into comics, where I was able to work with Dave Gibbons on a project, and a number of other developments. So good stuff.
So I'm sure over the years too, being around students, around colleagues, and around people who are just generally interested in getting into these different types of industries. I guess the most common question that it always goes to is like, how much? I mean, what does it really take to get into these industries, to get started?
First, I think if you're starting out in the industry, like you're trying to get in as an artist, I feel like it's important to know first which industry you want to get into, and be very good consumer of that product, in terms of like just knowing what the landscape is, knowing what you're going to be working for. So that's like, if any pre-qualifiers, that's definitely one that has to be there. Beyond that, you have to show that you can perform for those industries. So let's say it's games, right? You have to show that you can develop artwork for the property that you're going to be working for. And so there's three. There was like, I was always presented with like three qualities that kind of stuck with me. It was being fast, having great work, like high quality work, or being just a friendly guy. And so if you can capture what that means for each industry, being fast, being quality, or being friendly, have two of those, and for the most part, that'll get you a good leg up in terms of like getting in. I think over the years I've developed, like, I feel like there's one more factor there, and that's adaptability. So on top of being fast, on top of being really good, on top of being super friendly and being easy to work with, are you adaptable? Because these industries, like the games industry, the film industry, all these things are shifting all the time. New technologies like getting introduced. So how, if you're trying to get in, first, are you good enough? And then can you adapt your style or your something about you to be able to fit the needs of a shifting industry? That's what I would say about that. Brandon?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah.
So us being in the industry for a while now, and the things that, at least the pattern that I see for a veteran such as yourself, and being in the industry myself for that amount of time, is the power to endure and sustain. I think it was more, if we just get paid for the craft, it's a lot. It's an easier conversation, because then it would be just like, it's good work or not, right? But I think what makes it heavy is either the people or the other stuff when things don't go well, like when the office or the company or the project or something, all these other factors beyond just me and my craft, did I deliver, right? So my question is, what keeps you going, man? Like, I think if we go by the traditional game dev life cycle, which is, I think you've heard of this, about this, like 5 years, right? 5 years is like the burnout rate for most industry developers.
Yeah, I felt that around 5 years in. Yeah, definitely.
So you lived 4 times the life cycle of a game developer, if we were to factor that in. So do you mind kind of going through, like, let's craft this question into something very interesting. The 5, 10, 15, 20-year mark. Did you notice, like, each of those 5 years being monumentally different challenges?
There were definitely different challenges. One was like, I heard some of your older talks, and like you're talking about artist atrophy, and that definitely happened. And then life happened, and then different phases, right? So it's more like in the beginning, it's more like I've learned everything in school, and I've kind of maxed that out. Everything in school I've learned, I've basically used that to my full potential, and I don't know where to go. So then I had to kind of expand out of that. And then over the years, it was more like my role, like as a concept artist, I've kind of expanded, like, and just exhausted all my resources, everything I learned in concept art over the first couple of years. Like, I felt like I got to a point where I couldn't grow from there, and it was a hurdle to kind of overcome. So there are definitely sticking points, like, over the years.
And when you're talking about, like, life stuff happens, just like, I think with age, that comes with it, right? Your circumstance changes, or friends and family plays a big role into that. Totally. Was there any I don't want to get too personal, any specifics besides that you would like to share about, like, whoa, this is something I did not anticipate going into this?
Like, I mean, related to work, right? So, I mean, there were a couple of times when projects just, for whatever reason, they just get shut down, and you're not able to, no matter what you do as an artist or in your role, to be able to be excellent in that field. Just decisions get made up top, and you're all of a sudden out of work, right? Things like that. And so what do you do? How can you? This is where adaptability comes in, is because you have to kind of be able to think on your feet and figure out, like, okay, well, everything I was doing was for this specific project or for this particular piece or subject matter, right? And then now that that's been stripped away from you, you have to kind of go back to the landscape and figure out, like, okay, what else is out there, and how can I gear all my work towards something new, right? Things like that happen. That's happened a couple times. So,
right. And so how do you keep your art fresh and relatable with the new techniques that you said? There's this, like, momentum that you get from school where your instructors or mentors kind of lay it out for you and say, these are the things that you need to improve. And like you said, you reached to a point where you felt really good and comfortable about those things that you need to improve, and you started venturing kind of different industries of basically how to apply those in different ways.
Yeah.
How do you keep yourself going and reinvent yourself so that you're not going stale?
Yeah, so I think one thing, I mean, a lot of reflection time, obviously, between those, like, it goes in waves. Sometimes you're really busy, but then other times where you have a lot of time to reflect. So I feel like as an artist, I've always been a good learner of, like, principles or craft. So for me, that was what I stuck to. When things hit a wall, I would find something else about the industry that maybe I was weak on, and try to learn something new about it. So dive into a different style, or dive into a different what I was consuming. I would try to consume different things and try to explore what else is in the landscape. What are people responding to? What kind of other maybe conventions or other events I could go to try and learn something that I haven't learned already, So I would dive into, I'd try new things in that respect, and it kind of got me through. Sometimes it's altogether like completely different. Like I picked up cooking. I like to cook, so I stuck to cooking for a while, on the side. And then things I would pick up from cooking, I would actually bring back into the artwork, and apply it on a higher level. So it's different for everyone.
Yeah, you got to expand that a bit. How do you take something so different like cooking and actually bring it back to the Cintiq?
Okay, so you can break down art into principles, right? Like you have value, you have color, right? You have shapes, and like things that you can do with your line work. There's different types of quality of the line that you can apply to any drawing or any painting, right? So learning how to itemize those valuable pieces of the art and put them together. I always think of it as like ingredients, right? So if you so you have your recipe, like let's say, like we're looking at Ni no Kuni right now. So let's say Ni no Kuni has a certain recipe of elements in art, right? It's line heavy, right? It's more about there's not so much like heavy form shadow lighting. It's much more about the design of the character. So that has to be strong. Silhouette has to be strong. And so there's these items that you can kind of list, right? And so from a cooking standpoint, that would be your base, like soup, right? Or like you have your main ingredients that you want to put in a soup. And then how do you make it your own? You got these different flavors, right? It's like, what are you trying? Like a couple of days ago, I added strawberries to a tomato paste, right? To actually punch up the flavor. So you can do the same things with your art. Like, what are some like little things that you haven't tried that you could spice up for like if you're playing around with line work, if you're doing something very line heavy, how can you add this other layer to it that maybe no one has thought of, like, to kind of add into the mix. So that could be content, it could be something that you're trying in terms of how you put down a stroke. It could be your line weight. It could be all these things. And like, you just have to like really dive deep and like be creative in that sense. So to answer your question.
Of course. So, I mean, you clearly are showing, I'm just showing some of your work, man. Some that I haven't even seen yet. So it's like, what a dope ass line. So you're obviously qualified. You're obviously really excellent at what you do. And we talked about a bit how you kind of played around with jumping different industries to kind of keep those challenges up for yourself so you're not bored, because it sounds like too like that can easily happen. And the way you're talking about how food can go back into your 2D artwork is definitely something at least highlights how much of a better artist you are than me. Because I do not think like that at all. I don't go back and look at my ramen that I'm cooking that day and be like, how do I make my better better 3D art than this.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just me. That's my
But what?
that's my way of dealing with things. You know, I don't think everyone has the same path for sure. Like,
But when you explain it to me, it makes a lot of sense. It's like your brain
Yeah.
is kind of configured in a way that you can piece things together, and then it just clicks. And so when you do bring it back into your tablet or Cintiq or drawing board, you start to see these patterns that your brain just gets practice from all this other art form that you're kind of experimenting. And to me, it makes total sense because it gives you the break that you need, because I think a lot of artists are so hunched over all the time and
oh yeah, well,
tunnel
that's the
vision.
5-year mark, right? That's exactly the 5-year mark, because you're so comfortable doing a thing, right? Like, you've gotten to a routine of making a high quality piece, and you have a certain method of doing that, and you do the same thing, and that's how you get it done, right? But you're so used to that, doing that same thing over and over and over. It's like nothing's new. It's kind of boring, right? So that's like how I kind of learned how to take it to another level, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And have you talked to other artists or developers that shares the same amount of years for advice? Like, what are the best and worst advice that you've gotten from these people when we're kind of approaching past the 5-year mark, the 10-year mark now, let's say, as for an example, and you're just looking for like, wow, I made it through or past the graveyard of developers. I would say 60% of developers who felt the burn didn't come back from the grave, right? But now I'm in the little like 40 or 25% of the people who survived that. But I'm also feeling that dip of like, you know, and I also feel this way like around the 7-10 year mark. Especially in the game industry, you've reached the salary cap of what you can earn in your position.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's like, all right, money's not the motivator anymore. Yeah, I mean, I've been lead, I've been in these different positions, but it's just a title, really, at this point.
Right. Yeah.
I
totally agree.
With a different level of type of bullshit that comes with it. Yeah. The challenges is that, really.
Yeah. Right. So it's a marathon, right? And so how do you? There's different ways of countering it, I guess, and I really think it's case by case. Everyone's got a different story to tell and different struggles to go through. So some are like, I kind of feel like it also starts with what you were passionate about in the beginning. Like I have a friend who we connected on art because we were both really passionate about art, and training in that respect. And so we would struggle through, over the years, we'd kind of struggle together about different things that we were, you just bond that way. You'd have like long conversations about art and what it means to be an artist in these fields, and like what other people what else is going on, and how people are approaching it, and then why am I so frustrated doing what I do, and how can I benefit? Like, how can I be of value? So lots of conversations around that. But other people, like I've talked to, like they really just, they don't need that interaction as much. Like they work on their own, right? And so what they would do is just, when they're feeling it, they take like a 6-month sabbatical and like just travel Europe for like 6 months and not do anything, and then they come back all refreshed and like good to go. So it's different for everyone.
Have you tried that?
Kind of,
have you gone?
I've done a little. Yeah, I've done a little bit of traveling, and it does help for sure. You get so much exposure to things you would never think about here, like for us, it's in the States, right? So, but yeah, like traveling to Barcelona was awesome, and traveling to these different places in Europe were really eye-opening. Like you get different tastes of culture, and kind of some insights of how people live over there, and it's very different, and also what you learn about what people aspire towards, and visiting museums, like you get to see a glimpse of what they're inspired by. So it opens your mind that way for sure. I was able to see I guess this is kind of related to my path. Was I got to see people like Dali or Picasso, and just see their journey, like in over a lifetime, and I think that was really helpful for me because like I got to see how much more love they put into their work than say someone that's working for a game, as a just a 9 to 5, right? It's there's a huge level of difference in how much passion and how much more like dedication they put into their work, like down like so. And let me know if I'm going if you want to move on to another topic, but
No,
like
keep expanding.
I got to see Gaudi, right, for instance, in Barcelona, and like he's an architect, just as like, he did the Sagrada Familia, but he spent like 10 to at least 10 to 20 years on like one building, or in his final like masterpiece, like the Sagrada Familia, he spent like 40 years of his life living at the place, working on this one building or one tower of one building, and they're still working on it to finish it. And so, like looking at the details, like you look at you could find pictures online, obviously, and it's beautiful, but and you could see like gotta get a glimpse of like how it feels. But when you go into the details, like, and you actually talk to people about how it was made, like, and the choices of material and why he, like, every decision he made was like considered. And then so like he built this house, and like in one of the windows even, like man, down to the window handle, or like what you use to like open the window.
Oh, all right. I think we slowly just lost him for a second. Everybody just hang on.
It's just like, it's so intricate, and like, yeah, it's like so beautifully done that it's like really eye-opening.
Yeah. We just lost you for like 2 seconds, but I think we got
really?
a good amount of that. Don't worry. I think, I guess my question is like, I think concept artist does this a little better than most other types of artists, where we get inspiration and motivation by actually visiting these sites. I think it's very easy to kind of just Google search a lot of this and just it's not the same type of feeling. It's not the same type of inspiration. Just hearing a story where an artist was spending 20 years on a particular piece. It's not something a digital artist does anymore.
No, it's like, and who has time to, right? Yeah. But I mean, just going there and learning these things, like you kind of get a glimpse into a lot of their philosophies and why they would make these decisions as well. And so I feel like maybe not down to the nitty gritty, but just understanding their philosophy about behind why they would do something. Coming back to the artwork, I kind of apply some of that thinking, like why, understanding why you would do something, as opposed to just getting getting an assignment and doing it.
And so that definitely gave you another boost past the 10-year mark. Is it something that you feel like is going to sustain an artist, just continuously getting inspiration by physically visiting these masters. I guess the question is like, does that ever? Do you feel like that? Well,
I don't think that's the only answer. No, I
Okay.
don't think that's the only answer.
Well, so what other
I-
advice do you have with that?
Again, it's case by case. Yeah, I really think like everyone's going through different things. So, yeah, probably too many avenues to explore there.
Well, what other avenues do you feel like other artists usually? Because the ability to go visit a landmark or a beautiful just remnants of a master's work can feel out of reach for some.
Oh yeah,
I highly recommend it. I'm probably the least traveled person you'll ever met, but it's not like I don't want to. Obviously, I would want to. I would love to. How else would that be reachable if they don't have that access to kind of boost themselves out of that rut?
The easiest thing would be to go to a gathering where people of different disciplines or different cultures meet, and then ask them questions about their experience. And if there's a topic that you agree on or relate to, then asking questions about that, and then you'll probably find that they have some different experiences and different things that they have learned over the years. So I think just being open to that is extremely valuable.
So these meetups that you're talking about,
I mean, this could, like GDC, or or what else? E3, like games. We're talking about games, so yeah, game developers conferences. Like there's all sorts of talks like this one, or like the guy that you just posted before about different topics. But yeah, I think like meetup.com, I've explored a little bit. I should more, but it's really a matter of like how much time I have these days. So, but yeah, if I had more time, I would definitely go to meetup.com and like explore some of the different interests and different meetups that are going on. Like there's different resources, like Airbnb has experiences you can try, and local newspaper, Yellow Pages, I guess.
Yellow. I don't think I ever seen I haven't seen a yellow page for a long time, dude. Not just the phone book, just like a yellow page, and no one uses stationery as much.
But part of that is, I mean, before even going through that, I think there does need to be some kind of reflection in terms of what is it that you feel like you want to grow in, or is there something that you feel frustrated about that you could maybe address? Because if you don't have that in mind, then and you go to these places, like there's no intention there. There's no real like, you don't know what you're looking for, so you're probably not going to learn as much if you don't have that prep work, I guess.
Well, this is a interesting point right here, actually. So I think when we start going into the industry, at least I had a hard time kind of taking feedback, which was my like arrogant young blood type of like whatever, right? But then it took a while for me, like, well, this is a group type of project, and he knows way better than I do, or she knows way better than I do, and it's just kind of group effort, because we are going to put it out there to millions or thousands or whatever who's going to see this. So it's always good to get find a middle ground, right, without sacrificing the expression. But then now later in my career, it's like, well, I'm back to like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I know what. Do you find yourself in a similar type of journey now that you have 20 plus years in your belt, and as we've seen with your artwork, it's like, what is it to critique about? You either like it or you don't, and it must be tough, kind of take directions at this point in your career. I mean, draining too. So how have you been dealing with that?
I can see that happening. Yeah, but I feel like they've grown too. I mean, I feel like when I work with someone, haven't seen them for a couple of years, and then work with them again, most of the time they're in a different place too. So I kind of just kind of engage and approach it that way. Like, hey, we're in a new situation. What is it that I've learned that I could provide? And are they doing a good job? And where are they doing a good job? If there's something that I'm maybe qualities that they had that were maybe I would consider annoying, then how can I like maybe what can I bring to the table that would counter that or would add to the value of the product regardless? I don't know if you agree with that, but that's kind of that would be my approach.
I mean, that's a very political way of going about it for sure. But it is definitely one of those things that I think working.
But I think it's also
group,
our experiences, right? Because I think production's a little bit more. You probably see a lot more of that kind of stuff happening. And my experiences have been more on the blue sky area and more like on the upfront development. So I guess there hasn't been that much as much of those dynamics, and if they are there, they're either above or below, like meaning like things happen on the business side. I'm sure there's all sorts of battles that happen over there, and outside of like they get to a point where it's developable, and so we do our job and just like develop a project, and then after that it hands off to production. So, and I'm sure when you're in the trenches like that, a lot more stuff might happen. But like for concept and development, it's much more just like crank out the work and then get the ball rolling on in terms of how the defining the project or defining the look of the project or whatnot. So I think that it minimizes maybe some of those dynamics.
And concept art usually does the kickoff of any project or engagement, right? So can you kind of speak on the experiences where, especially with your roles changing, you've been art director, you've been lead, you've been a senior artist, you've been all over, how that kind of ties in at the end? I mean, have you found yourself at the tail end of things where you're kind of just making sure that the original vision is being delivered correctly in all disciplines? I guess that's the art director role, right? Just like, I painted it this way and you guys didn't do it right. This is how you do it.
My art director experience admittedly is limited. I wasn't managing big teams or anything, so I didn't have to deal with heavy people dynamics and all the personalities that are involved with that. So I think in terms of following direction, and delivering direction, it was much smoother in that sense. Like basically, things needed to get done more like almost like a startup level, and so I would just kind of try and cover my bases that way. So the stress is more like, what have we developed a finished product, and has the vision been carried out enough to where it can handle all of those aspects of the product? So I think that's where the challenge is for maybe a startup development. But something like on a bigger project, I guess that your responsibility is slightly more limited, or if they are that big, then you have a lot of responsibility in terms of like managing people. And so that's like, there's a whole other set of challenges there. So.
Well, on the subject of challenges and the survivability of an artist, I think a big component to that never really gets talked about as much, or at least shared from a mentor to a student or anybody within the industry, is the people aspect. It's just I always tell this to my my business partner, my friend, or anybody that is willing to listen out there, that people are variables. They have such a huge impact on your career, on your personal projects. You can plan it out as best you can, but if people come with their problems, it just really tosses everything
Oh yeah.
on a loop. So how has your dynamic changed from the beginning of your career, the 5-year mark, the 10-year mark? Like, have you found it getting easier, or are you still going back at the end of the day and be like, oh, this MFer just made it a little tougher?
Happens less. That stuff happens less and less. I think because the more you work on projects, the more you find the people that you like working with, and they like working with you, so they rehire you to work on things. And then so as long as you're doing good work and you're friendly, or you're connecting with people that match your personality, I guess, then the more that you work, like the less that you'll see those kind of things happen. And the challenge becomes more about the project itself rather than, this motherfucker or this guy like that you didn't get along with early on, right? Those kind of things are, I think, things that you work out in the first 5 years, and then you'll connect to the people that you really connect with, and those just, if you stick with them, like they'll kind of keep you going through the next however long. So that's what I found.
Mm-hmm. It really does become a game upon itself. Working with people, forming alliances, subconsciously or consciously within a workplace. And I've seen this, I guess, in bigger studios, and less so in smaller studios. But because a lot of times when you go in the smaller studios, you are there mostly because you know someone, right? Especially late in your career, right? Making that type of strategic move, it's because, hey, I know someone that's there. Might be a fun thing. You never really go out there and apply, oh, do I want to work on the next Call of Duty, or do I want to work on this obscure title that no one ever heard of with people I never worked with, whose resume I can't even find. So
hey, there's something, there are definitely values to that too. Like I've definitely worked on projects that were maybe considered more obscure, or like no one else would ever work on that. But there was something about it that I was drawn to, that I felt like, okay, this could be really cool for me learning something new. And I think that's where kind of my strength is learning something about something that I would have more patience for, that maybe someone else might not.
Have you found this pretty useful among your competitiveness or competitors within a workplace? Just having the patience to kind of see things through, and not different. Be.
Yeah. I can't say it's better or worse. That's just kind of just being effective of myself, and moving forward that way, and then seeing where things go.
What are the biggest difference between a 10-year artist versus a 15? What was the biggest thing that you saw change on a personal level, where you're like, yeah, I'm visiting these museums, I'm visiting around the world, I reinvigorated my passion for art and learning, but I'm hitting the 15-year mark or 20-year mark now, and I'm, it's like, do I? It's always a reset button, because 3 to 5 years is usually when we look for new jobs. I don't know too many people that are staying within the same job for 5-10 years. If they do, that's great, but somehow they've settled, and not really.
And I think maybe
changing.
I can't speak for everyone. because I don't know how they think or what they're going through. But my experience was 5 to 10 or 7 to 10 years in, I think I was a little bit more competitive. And it took me another 6 or 7 years to get over that competitiveness. And that's a really hard thing to do. And then being able to be more focused on team, that's actually a pretty hard challenge. You could say it and it's like there's things that they do to promote that, but to actually install that into your working method as a, like, let's say a freelance artist or someone who was more on the art side and less on working with development or like on production, that kind of thing. Teamwork is actually not the easiest thing to learn, in those situations. So I feel like that was a big hurdle for me. So
no, I definitely can relate to that. I think within our close circles, the concept team is kind of similar to, well, I mean, the environment team is usually the biggest team, but within the environment team, we're not hanging out with like 20, 30 plus people. It's usually within our cliques, which is 4 to 5, within our arm reach. And yeah, it took me a while to stop being competitive. I think the first formative years is like a learning experience, of course. You're trying to establish yourself on a junior level, so there is a slight competition there. And then when you get into mid-level to senior, you're kind of looking around to see who's the fastest, who's the best quality.
Right, yeah.
And job security becomes a real thing because now you have family and mouths to feed. So it's more like, all right, how do I, shine myself a better light than this person next to me? And then years after, it's like, oh my God, we're all gonna get laid off anyways. Who cares?
Yeah, and then and the younger generation comes in, right? And then basically, all these guys are getting kicked out of their jobs because this younger, fresher, cheaper person can do everything that the older guy can do. So yeah, it's like that's where adaptability really comes into play. It's like, how can you survive in that with those kind of dynamics?
So I have a question here from Indie Game Biz, our partner for this 3-day conference. The question is, what recommendations? Sorry, I'm gibbering right now. What recommendations do you have for younger people who want to learn more about the art side of the industry? 8 to 12 years old in particular. And this is actually, I want to tag on to that.
12. Oh.
Yeah, a lot of the electives now, at least in the United States, have been taken out. I think there's still basics of drawing within the classroom, but art in particular has been taking a hit. So how do you recommend the youngins get into this where they can at least help themselves pave the path?
I would say, 8 to 12 years old, I feel like that's something that would be a good thing to show interest with your parents and say, hey, I want to pursue this, and they might have a better idea of like how to connect to the right people. But on top of that, there's different things you can research. There's a lot of free tutorials online in terms of how to draw. You can look into schools, like trade schools that are specific to maybe an area of focus. If it is concept, then there's definitely concept art schools that you can go to, and you can research about that. But if it's just drawing, there's also, there's drawing schools specifically for that too. So it just depends like where you want to grow. So that's definitely a conversation to have with your parents. And, I think it would be a good bonding experience, and it would be a good way to, kind of get them on the same page of where you want to go. And as, I feel like that's where teamwork can be installed too. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely.
And then you chime in if you agree. Yeah.
I totally disagree. No, okay.
As a parent yourself, right? So.
As a parent myself, at least having some perspective in this industry, I think there's two types of drawings, and maybe you have a better, broader view on this, where, you know, if there's not much of a future of a kid sitting there drawing Donald Duck all day, right? Sure, they're getting the practice and getting the trick, but like I would want to tailor that towards more commercial type of art. So I mean,
the other thing I would add to that,
yeah,
8 to 12, you should be drawing every day.
every day.
You have all the free time in the world, so draw as much as you can and draw the things that you really love to draw.
So start with that.
8 to 10, yeah, if you're 8 to 12 years old and you're listening to this and you're serious about it, you should already have a few things that you already love to draw. So I would suggest drawing. Just, you know, for me it was Spider-Man. For me it was Garfield. I was like all over the map, like drawing cartoons, like watching Looney Tunes, and just diving into the artwork and like copying stuff for a while. You know, before I learned that. Hey, there's an actual education. You can actually go to school for this stuff. Like up until like I didn't even know there was school for art, but I loved comics and I loved cartoons and I loved video games. So I drew whatever I could. Whatever inspired me to draw, I would just draw that.
So let me well, let me tag into that, right? So if you were to go back, knowing what you know now, knowing the career path and how fruitful it could be, you going back to that 12-year-old Kinman Chan and be like, hey, I see that you're drawing a lot of Spider-Man, but here's a more clear path to optimize your time. What would you say to that 12-year-old to, like, instead of wandering around drawing all sorts of things, what's a better path there?
For me, I wouldn't tell myself anything because I was too stubborn as a kid. I was too stubborn to listen to anyone else. So, yeah, I can't say much more about that. I was just a very stubborn kid.
So yeah, they're like a perfect.
So no matter what, I was gonna draw whatever I was gonna draw at that point.
Right.
So.
Well,
if I knew that I was more receptive to listening, I guess, and I had to talk myself something, I'd say, open yourself up to different ways of learning. You know, there's a lot of wisdom in, you know, like growing up, I actually didn't like Disney drawings. But, you know, like later on, like I learned how valuable Disney drawings were and like how important those methods of drawing became to, and like were such a core for my foundation. I guess like being open to different methods and also having the discipline to stick to a method that maybe you don't agree with in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and look at kind of have the ability to look at the results, and if you like the results, study that method and be willing to adapt to that method, like for a time, you know, until you can get to that level, to that thing that you really loved about it, and then you can move on.
Mm-hmm. So my last question here, and this is kind of like cornering into 20-year mark here. I imagine at this point you're kind of taking a look around, and recent years is a little better, but we're starting to approach, like, we used to be the young one in the studio, and now we're the older ones. Oh, yeah. And there's not that much older people that sticks around. And it's this constant thing that I always see when I'm working within the studio, right? Like, what? I mean, that's something that just never get really taught. You either swing with it, or you don't, and you hang with the hang with the crowd as much as you can, but at some point you're like, man, where did all the older people go?
That's exactly what I was looking to ask. Where did they go? I have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, like, have you given this much thought? Because I look around the studios, like, it's not like I gave them a send off or a goodbye. I mean, they weren't even near the retirement age or anything. It's just that they're gone or working at smaller places or just hanging on for daily life. It's just something that HR doesn't really help us.
Some people, I have no idea. Like, and then other people, it's like, I know a good chunk of them became leads or became like more in like director management positions, or moved on to, take care of the kids or something like that. Like, they're just too busy to interact. Right. So I don't know where you're going about that question, but that's that's
well, I'm saying we're old.
Yeah.
And it's a young type of industry as far as I can tell. And
right.
And I feel like a lot of the at least senior level elites are kind of exiting games, or at least working at Facebook or Oculus or working at Google, something a little more stable where it's less competitive. I'm not saying they're settling, but in a way it's that seems to be where the market is heading. At least people who are maturing or has a family, they're looking less about the risk. I mean, they're looking more at the risk and taking less of it.
Yeah. I see, from my perspective, I see that games are transitioning more into immersive developments. So like AR and VR is becoming like a bigger thing. In games, it's like, I feel like there's like a really high bar of quality in games. So if you're trying to get in, like, good luck. It's really hard at this point. But at the same time, I feel like those guys are like super high bar and at lead positions, so they're cranking out great work. And so the games industry as a whole, it's consistent, right? It's so you have your audience, you have like the solid products that are coming out. So it's still a strong industry to be in. But yeah, definitely, like, it is transitioning now that there's more opportunities. Streaming is becoming a thing. AR and VR is becoming like more relevant slowly. And so I feel like people are jumping into these new avenues. Yeah, it's exciting. It's pretty exciting time.
Yeah, definitely, man. There's definitely a lot of avenues. I'm glad, and not to kind of just, I'm celebrating the fact that developers are finding places that they can stay and feel secure at, and not having to worry about the end product, being the future of their employment. Like, it's great to have a company like Facebook or Google whose main revenue stream is not games, because games again is so unpredictable. Where our business model, and I think we talked about this a bit with Yashka at the beginning of today's conference, where the business model needs to adapt and change, where we're not waiting on 2-3 years after the product is shipped to see if it's something worth pursuing.
Right. It's pretty, unless you're like a Naughty Dog or like something huge like that has made a name for themselves, it's pretty hard to survive in that kind of environment.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Kinman Chan, I am so happy for you to kind of guide us through the apocalypse of an artist. It is a real thing that I felt for a long time. I think I was with there after the 5-year mark, where the burnout rate was very real. Hit the 10-year mark, I was very different in my own experience, where I didn't even bother playing the game that I worked on. That was a really different type of, it's like, it's out.
Yeah,
Next.
well, I mean that's the thing about working on a project or a subject matter for so long. It's like you get so numb to it,
Yep.
right? So even I guess bringing it back to the art, right? So in the beginning, you're learning about how anatomy, right, and how to draw a figure, like, and then you do that enough, you draw thousands of figures, right, and it gets to a point where it's kind of second nature. You don't think about it anymore. So where it gets really fun, like you have to find new things about it that are fun. So for me, it was like diving into comics and learning about posing or like different things from a writing standpoint that you could do with a figure. And so it might be like drawing a figure that's like, well, it actually the first couple of years is more about like drawing figures in really expressive poses, like action packed, like fighting, or really extreme, like motions or moves, or just fantastical things. And then I feel like it evolved to someone drinking coffee, or like could be really interesting. And how do you draw that? Like I don't know, it evolves, but you have to find something about it that fuels you, rather than just making it a second nature thing and doing the same thing over and over. So for games, I can see if you're doing something like Call of Duty over and over, you're so familiar with that subject matter, you don't want to draw another like military guy like in a desert. So what are some ways you can make it interesting? I don't know. After so many years, it might be hard to surround yourself around. You probably have to try and travel or do something like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I have one last question before I send you off. Just to kind of ask for your thoughts about this in your own personal journey. We're both artists, of course. I'm in the 3D, you're in the 2D world. And you're bringing up Call of Duty. Well, I mean, I did feel that. I did feel that at a certain point. But for me too, I took a step back. It was less about the subject, but more about my overall well-being. It was more like, do I want to be one of 300? This is a project that probably would survive without me or exist without me. And I was at a point where it's like, I need to work on something because I got opinions, I got ideas too, that needs to be expressed. And if I don't go out and try it, this idea, this product in my mind won't exist. Like at least that was my 10-year mark, where I felt like I didn't want to be a part of a big project anymore. I just completely, it wasn't burnt out. It's just I didn't see an impact as much as I thought I would.
Or you didn't place importance on impact as much as
that too.
You're growing as an artist. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just like I started this with like, how do you tailor the kids to make money out of this passion of where they're drawing Donald Ducks into commercial art, because that's the viable option right there to turn it into a career, right? But then after doing commercial art for so long, it's like, oh my God, it's just, I'm not downplaying that there is a lot of things you can learn by creating commercial art, but the definition of commercial art, it's a team thing.
It's always exciting. For sure, it's always exciting.
Yeah.
It's always exciting. But definitely, like, I could see, like, you're focused on a subject for so many years. Even though the projects themselves are exciting in that field, it's like you're just bored of the field, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So,
and this is something, I definitely see when you're talking. It definitely resonates with me. It's the subject matter is great, but there's that people quality to it where it's like too many people, and then the idea to express myself gets lost, right? Because it's that classic example of too many hands on the final product, right? Where it gets kind of malformed from its original creation,
sure,
right?
yeah, right.
It's a bunch of people touching your clay model.
Yeah.
What made it exciting, and I see that a lot with team effort, and on smaller teams, it becomes. I feel it's more pure in terms of the expression,
for sure.
But there is definitely a lesson there with bigger games where their whole marketing department and stuff that I think needs to be still factored in smaller projects. Because you can't just sit there and do your best art, but no one buys it, right? You're not going to do that forever. So there's a balance there that I'm slowly learning from all my big commercial jobs, but at the same time, it's disheartening to kind of go through that path with so many people.
Right. I feel like, and working in big environments versus working in small environments, there are different challenges. There's different advantages and disadvantages. So,
well, Kim and Chan.
Touch on that, but
we'll definitely got to do a part 2 of this for sure. Thanks for kind of joining in and being part of this GDEX. This is also part of the time where if you want to throw some people your way, where can they check you out? Either an ArtStation, let them know.
Yeah, I mean, I have an ArtStation account and I have an Instagram. ArtStation, both you can search for Kincept, KINCEPT. I don't post as much as I'd like to, just because I'm so busy. But if I were to update, those would be the places to update. So.
Perfect, man. Well, thanks a lot, man, for joining me. And definitely gonna follow up for and follow Kim and Chan on ArtStation. You've seen his artwork, some art. This guy is so prolific, dude. I thought I seen everything that you put out, but like me scrolling through, it's like, holy crap, this guy has a lot of girth. You guys done everything, but it's always exciting to see your growth, man. We got to keep in touch.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you a lot.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here. So,
of course.
Always a pleasure.
Well, thank you.
Excited to hear the other talks.
Of course. Well, that is the perfect segue, and I'm going to start to mute you soon.
Okay, sounds good.
See ya. Have a good one, man.
All right, see you, man.
Bye. Right. So, yeah, that's it, everybody. That's we have one more talk by Jay Powell that's coming up. He is the head of Indie Game Business, and he is the last 2 days of this Independent Game Week. And let's kind of go through the sponsors and partnerships here to kind of remind you what's up. If you are liking the content, I advise you to go to gdox.me and drop a donation, buy merch, help out, and support. Because any of that donation, 80% of that goes back to all our speakers for giving their hour of their time to give you insight and interesting topics to consider as you are making your journey through the game industry. And so this conference, which is GDEX 2019 Deux, that's French for two. I'm hearing Jay laugh. You guys can't hear it. I'm probably saying it wrong. But let me kind of go through. Let me go through our conferences here. I'm playing around with the button. We are in the last hour, and it's an exciting hour. So stay tuned as I go through this. So this conference is being delivered to you by Perforce and Unity. So first up, Perforce, if you are into version control, who isn't? If you are liking to make game projects and keeping it in check, as well as keeping it afloat, you need Perforce. Every big studio that I've been through and every small studios I've been through have used Perforce in every way. So if you are a small team, 5 or less, you can go to perforce.com and actually use it for free. They are a huge supporter for independent developer. And don't walk around with thumb drives, transferring files. Get in on the program and go to perforce.com. If you are a small or a big developer, you definitely have heard and should use Unity. This is the leading software for game engines, man. For mobile to small projects to big projects, everyone's using Unity to get the best graphical fidelity and ideas out there to your future audience and buyers. So go to unity.com, who is a huge supporter of gdux.me, that is bringing you these 3-day conferences of talks and game industry veterans to your front door of online, if that makes sense. And of course, before I introduce our next speaker, I definitely want to talk about Indie Game Business Conference. This is an online conference that's happening right after GDUX on Thursday and Friday this week, that is going to be connecting you to publishers or anybody that is looking to finance their project or get their word out. You want to be a part of this conference to connect and to go to indiegamebusiness.com using the code word Game Dev Unchained. Or if you don't like typing, just go to gdux.me, click on the logo on there, which will link you to the 50% discount, and buy your tickets now for Thursday and Friday. All right. So I hear Jay fussing back there, and that means he's anxious to come on to the show. So I'm going to add him right now. He is added. Jay, do you hear me?
What's up?
There we go. All right, Jay. So I'm going to switch to your camera. Bam.
Yeah,
There we go.
I figured I'd let you look at that nice LinkedIn picture that you emailed everybody of me in a suit, and then we go live, and it's me in a hoodie with my hat. So, no, I was actually having fun listening to the last speaker, especially when y'all started getting into the whole, what do you do after 5 years? And I'm like, people stay in this more than 5 years? So I know I've been doing it that long, but that's just because I don't have enough sense to do anything else. So it's always interesting to me to hear everybody else's take on everything.
Mm-hmm.
So how's everything been going?
I'm good, man. I'm happier now that you're here. So you're closing off our first day of GDUX. Let me take away this. I keep doing this like flashy transition here. So again, this is the last speaker for today. For anybody that is continuously loving the content, come back tomorrow. Don't just log off and forget us forever. So I'm going to go ahead. I see your slides flashing a bit. Let's see what's going on over there as you figure it out.
That
There we
just
go.
did the share screen. Let's see what happens if I do this.
Oh, now you got the black screen. So as you are figuring that out, I'm going to buy
If
some
this was
time.
working like 5 minutes ago, it's just crazy. All right,
No
if I
worries.
leave interview, can you bring me back in?
Of course. So this is what I do, man. I'm always
I
dancing.
have no idea.
No worries.
Shit you not. This was working like 2 minutes ago. All right, I'm going to leave for a second.
So Jay is doing his disappearance act. He's going to join us right back. So if you guys have questions for me, what I'm eating for my diet, what my workout routine is, this is the time to ask, as Jay is kind of figuring his way out, or figuring his way in. Let's see. I think he's about to be added right here. All right. I think he's starting to go. So again, if you're joining us from Twitch, Facebook, or YouTube, feel free to ask those questions within those channels. I will get it in front of Jay by the end of his presentation. And this one in particular is very interesting. It's on IP licensing for games. So before I ruin any of the content, I'm going to hand it over to Jay. Let's see here, Jay. I'm not hearing you. Let me make sure. 1 second. As I'm clicking around.
You there?
Yes.
You got it?
Do you hear me? I got you. Now I hear you. All right. Perfect. So I'm going to transition
I love this.
to your screen. And Jay, go ahead.
All right, so yeah, we're going to talk about IP licensing, and I'm like fast forwarding through slides already, trying to get to full screen. The reality of the industry now is that you just absolutely need to have whatever step up on the other company that you can get to get your game noticed. We've got like thousands of games getting launched every single year, even more so on mobile, but even just PC and console stuff. Your ability to stand out and draw users is just, it's harder and harder every single year. And so we talk to a lot of developers, and I've been doing this for 20 years. And what we always hear is discoverability. What's the biggest issue you have aside from funding? Once everybody gets funding, the next step is discoverability. How do we, get noticed? So just real quick about me, I came into the industry in the late 90s. I have, for better or worse, been doing this for 20 years now. I spent the first part of that as an agent. I worked as a publisher. I've worked as a development and for the developer. And for the last 10 years, run my own consulting firm. And so we do everything from biz dev to high-level marketing to licensing for a very wide variety of studios, not studios, but companies around the world, developers, publishers, conferences, service providers, a lot of different companies. Over the years, I've worked with Star Trek, Garfield, Disney. I mean, you can read this stuff. I've done a lot of licensing deals. We'll suffice it at that. So there is a lot we want to go through, and I'm on the East Coast, and it's like near dinner time here. So I'm going to make sure we do this promptly. We're going to go through preparation and positioning, identifying, qualifying these partners, preparing your materials. What do you need to have ready when you start going out? The deal structure and terms, which is the meat and the potatoes of all of this, where everybody needs to know exactly what needs to put in these contracts and what they don't. And then how you maintain that relationship, because that's where we see more licensing deals go sideways between developers and IPs, or publishers and IPs, or all three together, however it's in there. Is you have to realize a lot of times we as a game industry don't speak the same language as the licensing industry. And so being able to maintain that relationship is super, super important. So when you're getting the preparation side, the first thing that you're always going to need is a CRM. And the CRM stands for, what is it? Customer Resource Management. Basically, it's a gigantic database. The one you've always heard of is Salesforce, but there are dozens of these things that are far more applicable to small studios. So there's Sugar CRM. There is Nutshell is what we use. HubSpot has their own CRM now. Just go online and Google CRM for small business, and you'll have a list of them. I mean, there'll be plenty of them that pop up. Just find the one that is most applicable to you. You want to have a minimum space for 1,000 contacts, and that sounds really, really big, but you'll quickly fill it up. Our database has got 30,000 contacts in it, I believe now. You want to have a minimum of 5 users. You want the ability to schedule tasks and events, and that's mainly to help remind all of us to follow up with people. The ability to enter notes on accounts and contacts. That's your basic requirements that you want, before anything and everything else. So when you're going and picking that CRM, one, keep in mind, everyone in your company doesn't need to use it. As long as the people who are out there talking to the licensing companies and doing the biz dev side of everything, as long as they have access to it, you're good. It's not something that your lead artist and your lead programmer, I'm not saying you don't give them access to it, but I wouldn't pay for them to have access to it. You've got to figure out, once you've got that, you're going to start dumping contacts in it, basically. But before you do that, as part of that preparation, you need to understand what your goals are. Are you looking to create a game based around an IP from the start? You just absolutely have to have it, or have to have something like it, and you want to go from there? Or is it something that you've got a game to alpha or beta stage and you realize it's missing a little something, and so you want to add an IP to it, to try to boost that visibility? Or the third scenario, which we see a lot of, is you've actually had a successful game on the market But now you want to go and create a new version. We used to call them reskins, and I hate that phrase because a true reskin is just going in there and basically reskinning the characters in the background of the story and all that stuff. Those games don't work. Don't try to do that. You have to understand that even if you are adapting an existing game to a new IP to release a new version, you have to go back in and do work on the design and level selection or wherever. You have got to get back into the bulk of that game to make it authentic to that license. Otherwise, everyone's just going to see it for what it is, and you're just slapping an IP on it and you're not really doing anything new. So understand what your goals are. When you're going out and talking to the licenses and the IP folks, you want to understand what their goals are as well. Are they looking for something to be involved with from the early stages and really, boost the engagement level of their users and their fans? Or are they looking for something that they can just slap, their name on and make a bunch of money? Or are they looking at it as a marketing drive, something to raise not only engagement from their fans, but awareness of the brand in general? Because there's different variations of all of that. They each have their pros and their cons, but you need to be aware of what their goals are as well. So, then you want to go and start, assessing value here. And that's where, it pays to be very critical of yourself, to understand, what your strengths are. If you're coming in with no track record as a team and you've got some leads that done projects in the past that shipped, but this is something completely new, you need to understand that there's not a lot of value that you're intrinsically offering that IP. The value that you're going to offer that licensor is money. That's just the reality of it. If you're in a situation, and I'll use, Rocket League, for example, they had a very successful game, completely unbranded, their own original IP. And then when it got successful, they started bringing things in like Batman and Back to the Future and a lot of these other licensing plays that you see in there. Their value to a licensor was completely different. They had a lot of market share and eyeballs that they could bring to something, and that's what they were focused on. And so you need to understand and be on. Again, you've got to be honest with yourself where you fall into that category, and then factor that into everything. So the next stage is determining risk, and there's not ever going to be that perfect title, that perfect deal. You're always going to have red flags, but what I tell folks is when those red flags start to look like a golf course and they're everywhere, that's when you need to start being very, very careful. You have to understand the risk not only from the IP side, but also from your side. Weedcraft from Devolver earlier this year is a good example. Great game, but simply because it dealt with marijuana, the growing and the selling, they lost out on a lot of, I'm not gonna say they lost out. They missed some traditional media, but actually the stink that it raised helped them in the end. But, if you're making a gory fighting game, for example, there's a lot of kid-friendly brands that aren't going to be interested in working with you. There is a very good reason all the Avenger movies and the Marvel movies, except for Deadpool, are rated PG-13. They want these exciting action pieces, but they have to keep it okay for kids to come see as well. And so understanding where your game falls in potential risk for an IP holder is very important. On the flip side, understanding the risks that come with that IP holder, you need to be very well aware of. So, for example, right now, Kickstarter's having all this, negative press around their anti-union stance, and did they or did they not fire people who were trying to build a union? Whether you care about that at all, or you're on one side of that argument or the other, makes no difference. What you need to realize as a developer is Kickstarter is going to lose some of its install base, some of the people that are going to be contributing to it, simply because of this situation. Not necessarily because they're in favor or against, but just because of it. And it's not going to have anything to do with you, but you're going to lose opportunities in there. The same goes true for any IP out there. SeaWorld is a big example. I'm old. I'm in my 40s. When I was growing up, everybody wanted to go to SeaWorld. You went to Disney World, you went to SeaWorld while you were down there. It was the greatest thing ever. Now, after the whole Blackfish thing and a lot of, consumer awareness and, stance on how they treated the animals or what have you in there, not exactly a good brand to be associated with. They're slowly closing down. They're slowly going out of business. And so back in the late 90s, I suppose, THQ had a big old, tycoon game, SeaWorld Tycoon. You couldn't do that now. You could do it, but you're not going to get nearly the exposure and the benefit that you would get out of doing something more traditional or a completely different kind of theme park attraction. You have to understand and be ready for, because sometimes this stuff is going to come out of the blue, but you need to be ready for and be aware of any problems that IP may reflect back on your game. So beyond that, we've got marketing versus licensing. And that is key, because that's two separate ways that you can come into the company. You can either start by calling their marketing team, or you can start by calling their licensing team. Licensing is going to want you to give them money in some way, shape, or form. It may not be money up front, but it may be money on the back end. They're not interested in paying you to do anything. They want you to pay them to use that IP. Marketing is the other side of that coin, though. You can go to the marketing side, and if they have a marketing budget that includes interactive, content or partnerships. We just had Halloween, and there's a bag of Sour Patch Kids upstairs that has Crash Bandicoot Racing on it. Food is a great new, I won't say new, but relatively new market for games, because it's so easy to do things like QR codes or, cards that you can drop in the side of a cereal box that have an access code that you can go download something. The marketing team at a company is going to be interested in paying you to do something. The licensing team is going to be interested in you paying them to do something. 9 times out of 10, if you're building a long-term relationship with one of these companies, you're going to start out on the licensing side and then slowly move over to the marketing side. There are going to be occasions when that gets completely flipped on its head, but generally that's going to start out. The more value that you show as a studio with your game and your track record and the people involved, the more you're going to be able to target the marketing side. Otherwise, it's the licensing side. And it depends if you want to have your own IP, or there's a lot of different factors involved. It's like everything else in this industry. When people ask me a question, it's like, well, it depends. That should be like the tagline of our company. It depends. So you've got an idea of what you need. You've got your CRM set up. You've got, you understand the risks involved. You're ready to start looking and identifying who to work with and which IPs are going to be good for you. And you need to do this. Don't ever get like laser focused on something. And I've had clients do this. They have a certain celebrity or brand in mind, and they just absolutely get tunnel vision on it. They don't look at anything else. It's just like, I have to have that particular IP. And that's dangerous, simply because there's a lot of options out there. Some of them are going to be better for you than even the one that you're thinking. Some are going to be worse, but you have to go out and do your research to find out. You can't just say, I'm making a basketball game, I have to have Stephon Curry. It's one of those, you've got to be able to look at the bigger picture. So the first thing I always recommend is join LIMA. LIMA is the Licensing International Marketing Association. I may have just absolutely made that up, but it is the licensing group that oversees, and it is the big network of licensing agents and IPs and all that stuff globally. The beauty about joining Lima, and there's a cost to it, but I don't know the number. They don't have it on the website anymore. You have to like send them an email to figure it out. If you're going into doing licensing, it's absolutely worth it, because the minute you join, you get access to their database, and it's a digital database of everybody who is in the organization. So, y'all were talking about Garfield before. If you want to go in and you're like, I've got this game, it'll be great for Garfield, you can just type Garfield in their website and it'll pop you up. The company's actually called Paws, Paws, but Paws will pop up with their contact information. Who's their licensing agent? Here's their email address. Sometimes it's even got their cell phone numbers in it. It's absolutely key to being able to keep your options open when you're, looking for an IP. So once you've joined Lima and you have this big access, you need to start doing, your research into which one is going to be the best. So we use something as a baseline called, the social footprint. And it's literally, you add up their Twitter followers, their Facebook followers, Instagram, if applicable. If they can tell you how many people they have on an email newsletter, that helps too. It's basically how many people they have access to. If we said, we're going to release this news on social media, how many people is it going to hit? So that social footprint is key. You need to make sure that the IP is appropriate for your audience. And this is stuff we got back to on the preparation side. Make sure it's appropriate for what you want to do. Once you start having conversations with them, and it starts out, a simple email introduction, or you can cold call someone now. I'll give you about a 50-50 chance of starting a good relationship like that, because some people don't like it anymore. I'm old school, and it's still weird for me not to like just cold call somebody, but I do it very rarely myself. Understand what their goals are, have that conversation with them. Are there new things that they're going to release that they want to promote? The main thing you want to figure out is, do they really want to be a partner with you in this game, or do they just want your money? And both of those types of companies exist. We got a phone call last year from a company, and they represented several 80s and 90s action movie IPs, big IPs. I mean, it's one of those that you instantly know the movies and who's involved with them. But we said, what are you looking for? And they said, $250,000. And I'm like, okay, so are you going to be doing anything to help promote the game, social media, outreach to your fans? And they're like, no, we're not going to do anything. The IP speaks for itself, and this is what it's worth. And it was a very short conversation because I was done talking at that point in time. That's not the type of partner you want to get involved with, because they literally don't care about your game. And all they want is that payment up front, and then they're happy. Now, I guarantee you, if you do that deal and you make a crappy game, they're going to be all over you and, absolutely can't believe you did this to their IP, but they're not interested in helping you promote it. And that's what you need as an indie dev 9 times out of 10. It's almost less about the IP, the more about how you can, use that fan network and the engagement they have, with the people passionate about that IP to help the discoverability of your game. And if they're not going to do anything, they're not going to be a good partner for you. And, like Brandon said, if you have questions at any point, just toss them into Twitch. I'm just going to chair through this thing. Sorry. All right. So when it comes to preparing your materials for outreach, and this may happen before you start doing a lot of that research. It may start, afterwards. It just depends on, how you go about doing the research. If you just looked up everything online, then obviously it's going to be after it. If you were calling them, I want to be before it. But anyway, so we're going to go through, and these are all on separate slides. So what they, as licensors, are looking for, what to put in your deck. Don't call, never mind, call them, and then, create your system. So what do they want? And we sat down and before we did this lecture, I went and called several friends of mine in the industry, and I'm not going to be naming them outright because I can't do that, but I can tell you that all the stats you're going to see in this next few slides are very recent and very real. So licensors are going to want to see a quality studio or a team. And, if you're Insomniac and, you're not owned by Sony, we'll pretend that they're not, it's a no-brainer. They can immediately see the work that you did. Oh, you did the new Spider-Man game. They can go back and say, yes, you're a team we want to work with based on your track record. But a lot of times we don't have that ability. So what you want to show, even if it's a brand new team, is that you've got the leads in place. Your lead producer, your lead engineer, your lead artist, your lead designer, the folks that are, overseeing everything in the game, they are a, good fit. They have a good track record in the industry. They are somebody that this IP holder will trust, with their license. Then they're going to look for a past track record of, the games that are done either by your team or, by the company in general. If you've done a lot of strategy simulation games, you're not going to get as warm of a response from somebody who's basically looking to do a mobile endless runner. Make sure that the work that you can show as your past efforts is something that is applicable to that IP. And so, and you want to make that very clear in your documentation. It's like, look, we can make an excellent racing game because here are the other racing games that we've done. So, that needs to be in there. You want to show that you have the ability to take that game to market. And what we mean is, basically don't go in there and pitch them that you're going to do a free-to-play endless runner if you don't have, the money set aside to do user acquisitions, or you haven't done user acquisitions before. When you can go in and say, we're going to bring this game to PC and console, and here are the other PC and console games that we've done in the past. Or, if you are pitching for a free-to-play game and you can say, here are the other free-to-play games that we've actually completed in the past, and we brought these to market, and here are the KPIs that go around with them, then that's your better case scenario. So one of the things one of my friends pointed out, you don't have to show that vertical slice if you have a track record. 10 years ago that wasn't the case. They wanted to see what the game looked like before they did anything. Now, because games have become so, embedded in society, basically, and virtually everyone is a gamer, even though they don't want to admit it, you have executives at these companies that have a little more experience in the industry, and they can say, oh, okay, I understand what you're saying. You're going to take a Mario Kart game and you're going to put our IP and characters in it, and they get it. This will still always depend on how forward thinking that IP holder is. As a general rule, the older the industry, and I'm thinking books and movies in particular, the harder time you'll have with this. There are, folks in those industries who are forward thinking. I've worked with them. I have good friends in both of them. But at the same time, you will still run into those executives that have been, doing movies at this movie studio for 50 years, and they didn't need games 30 years ago. They don't need them now. That mentality still very much exists. If you go to the licensing show in Vegas, or they do one in London, you will, and not everyone, but you will go to meetings and walk up to stands and introduce what you do and get this like glazed look in their face because they're not exactly sure how that fits into what they're doing. That's changed a lot in the last 5 or 10 years, but it's still not completely pervasive. And we don't even see this at all publishers sometimes. You get publisher executives, you get licensing executives who aren't gamers. And so you have to absolutely boil it down to the lowest common denominator. But your opportunity is much better, nowadays, that you can show something to someone, and it doesn't necessarily have to be already reskinned to what their IP is. They're going to get it. You can explain it without having to show them a whole bunch of gameplay. So when you're building that deck, what do you put in it? You need to have, typically, I don't like to send out decks that are more than 10 to 15 pages, 10 to 15 slides. When you get past that, you start getting a whole lot of, glazed over effect from executives. They're like, oh God, there's like 15 more slides in this thing. I don't want to keep clicking. But, you want to keep everything as short as possible. So, a game description, outline, genre, this game, but this difference, the backstory, how it's going to apply to, what their IP is, but keep it brief. A short game description is where you break it down into one sentence. My example was always, Rainbow Six for so many years, because that was like the first one that I saw that really got it. But now that IP is like so evolved, I'm not real sure how that's new anymore. But back in the day, when we first sat down and saw Rainbow Six coming out of Red Storm, we're like, okay, it's a shooter. So what? And they're like, it's a shooter, but, and then they tab over and they show you the, strategy side of it, where you figure out where you're going to break into windows and doors and everything. And it's like, oh my God, there's a whole tactical element to it. It's that, you want to be able to say, my game is Doom, but with tactics, or my game is Mario Kart, but with ships instead of, carts. Take whatever is known, put a twist on it, and that's where you end up. Outline your key game features, and I'm going to say the unique selling points as well, even though you want that are two different slides, because it's absolutely essential to know what's a key game feature and what's a unique selling point. So look at Fortnite. Game feature, it's a battle royale. You can pick your skins, you can pick your weapons, you dropped on an island, you fight to the center, last person alive wins. Those are the features. The unique selling point is, oh yeah, and you can build your own structures. Know and understand the difference between a feature and a unique selling point. Having multiplayer is not a unique selling point. Being able to change and customize your character is not a unique selling point. Now, if you have complete 3D morphing technology and can, grow horns out of somebody's head that are completely different than the, more than just like clicking the next tab and saying, oh, I like horns too on this character, that could be a unique selling point. But unique selling points are just that. They're unique. And I know in this industry, it's extremely hard to say we have something that's completely unique. But if you think about it, and if your game is set up well and it's been thought out from the get-go, you're going to have one, or you're going to have one that this is a feature that very few games bring in. Your best case scenario is this is a feature that you're familiar with from another genre, but we've applied it to this genre. So, think about that. You want your features in there. You want your unique selling points. Break down the platforms. You want PC, console, mobile. This is where you put in your pricing model as well, because free to play versus premium is a big deal for licenses, because a free to play game is going to get their IP in front of more people. A premium game is going to get it engaged with more. So you want to make sure that you've got not only the platforms that you're targeting, but your financial model on that slide as well. When's your release date? Doesn't have to be specific. You can even say like later half of 2020. Nobody at this level is looking for, the fact that you're going to release it on September 12th. The overview of the studio, and if the studio's new, say you're new. We are a brand new studio comprised of veterans from, boom, the next slide, team bios. But, outline on the studio slide how big your team is, how many projects that have been produced if the studio has a track record, and the location of the company. And location can still be big. You do have companies, especially out in LA or up in New York, that want to work, very closely with somebody, but it's not nearly as important as it used to be. And at the same time, not having a set office, not having everybody in one general location used to be like the death stroke for licensing deals and a lot of publishing deals too, honestly. But these days, everyone is very accustomed to, okay, look, we have a dispersed team. Not everybody's in the same place, and they're fine with that. But just outline the general location, or at least the location of their primary point of contact. So then your team bios, and again, you don't necessarily have to have everybody in there. I would recommend not having everybody in there, to be honest, because then it's just going to add slides on slides on slides that people don't want to click through. What people care about are the executive team and your team leads. That's all you got to worry about. Everybody else is wonderful. We want you to be part of the team, but in the initial deck, don't put them in there because it's just more stuff for that person to click through. A list of past titles from the studio, obviously focus on the ones that were very successful, but also focus on the ones, even if they weren't as successful, but were more applicable to what you're doing for this particular project. So if your studio has been around for 5 or 10 years, and lately you've been doing a lot of first-person shooters, hardcore titles, but you have a track record 2 or 3 years ago of doing kids platformer games, put that in there, mention it. Even though you haven't been doing it recently, it at least shows you still understand how and what's important. Screenshots, concept, render sketches, it depends on what stage everything's at, but you want to have some of them in there, showing different settings. Don't put, 5 different slides that all show different concept art for different characters. You want a variety of things in there. Backgrounds, characters, different colors, what's the user interface look like? The more variety you can put in there is possible, but don't stack 20 of these things in there. Finally, your company logo and list of awards or other industry recognition. And if you don't have it, that's fine. It's not like at the end of the day, like I said, the whole point of this is licensing has changed a lot. You don't have to be 10 years, 15 years into a studio to be able to go out and get these things. So, all right, now we're going to get into the fun stuff. Here's what deal structures look like, terms, that sort of stuff. These are the major terms that you're going to see, in an agreement. What's the minimum guarantee? Advance versus flat fee. So a couple of things to keep in mind. A minimum guarantee doesn't necessarily mean it's all due before the game ships. It means you're guaranteeing them over the course of 1 year or 2 years that this is how much money they're going to see, but you don't necessarily have to give that up day one. An advance is going to be just that. We're going to give you an advance on the royalties that we intend to generate for you through our games, and that an advance is generally due, obviously, before the game starts. MGs and advances are usually associated with some sort of back-end royalty. A flat fee deal isn't. And a flat fee deal can be very good for you, or it can be bad. And I'm not like in a lecture hall, so I can't ask you to raise your hands. But the issue with The Witcher, if you followed that earlier, when CD Projekt first licensed those books from the author, he didn't think anything of it. Games weren't that big a deal, and they worked out a flat fee deal. And of course, CD Projekt wasn't nearly as big as they are now, and they didn't have that success yet that they were about to show. But then, 8 years later, the dude tries to turn around and sue them because they've made millions off of those books, and he's not seeing any of it. Well, he's not seeing any of it because he agreed to a flat fee deal. I mean, that's the reality. Sometimes, it's going to work out for you. Sometimes it won't. If you're going and you're doing something, and a social casino game is the primary example here, one game where you've got a whole lot of IPs in it, you're best to start doing flat fee deals because it makes royalty reporting a nightmare. And if you've got something that's going to be, you truly anticipate is going to be a long-term, revenue provider for you, a flat fee deal is better because it's going to save you money. The downside of it is you absolutely have to know what your revenue projections are before you can do that, or you may grossly overpay for something and never see that money back again. So anyway, these are going to range from, literally nothing up to maybe $250,000 a year. Anything beyond $250,000 a year, you best be doing Star Wars or something along those lines, because that's a lot of money that gets, tapped in there. Royalties. So royalties can vary dramatically. For an IP, though, you shouldn't be paying more than 20%. It's going to go up or down depending on the IP itself, how savvy the agent is with the industry, the particular situation that you're in. Minimum guarantees and advances always affect royalties, because the reality is the more money you give them up front, the less they'll want on the back end. But you can get very, good IPs for as low as 7%, but go ahead and factor in your head, it could go up to 20%, just, to be safe. If it goes beyond 20%, you either have an extenuating circumstance where you have absolutely no leverage at all on, the negotiation, or it's not a good deal, bottom line. Your term, 2 years plus or minus. Going beyond 2 years, you need to make sure that it's something that you want to be involved with for that long, because especially like you look at something like TV, or nowadays with all the streaming networks, you don't know how long that show is going to be around. We see shows canceled mid-season. So, and we'll talk more about TV shows in a little bit, but most of these IP deals are going to be for 1 year, and then they'll have continuation clauses in the contract. 2 years is about as far as I would push it, unless you've worked with the studio or this IP a lot in the past and you're super comfortable with them. So there's a section of the contract, it's called grant of licensing, grant of license. And it basically boils down to don't pay what you don't need. All of these numbers that we're talking about with the royalties and the minimum guarantees get drastically affected by this clause. Likeness rights are anything that includes a celebrity's face or their voice. Music rights are obviously, the music. So you can literally go out and do a Kiss game and never use the music from, the band, and you'll actually save a little bit of money in there, because you don't have to go and, get those rights separately. Again, with a lot of these social casino games, you see a lot of the licensing is done without the license rights, because let's say if you're doing a Top Gun, any kind of game, you can show what Top Gun is with just their logo, a picture of an F-14, a lot of these things in there, the iconography basically that lets you know it's a Top Gun game. Or if it's a simulator, you can still get away with doing it without having Tom Cruise and Anthony Edwards and Val Kilmer's faces all over it. Because the minute you do that, your rates go up, your advance goes up, your royalties go up, the amount of time it's going to take to get things approved goes up. If you don't need that celebrity's face or voice, don't pay for it. Bottom line. Territory, again, only what you need. If there's no difference in getting, no cost difference in getting the whole world versus, North America and Europe, for example, then yeah, go ahead and get the whole world. But you will have cases where, celebrities are extremely popular in other countries. So the classic example for all of us old people is David Hasselhoff. Here in the US, David Hasselhoff is known as the guy behind Knight Rider and the guy on Baywatch. I'm really showing my age when I say he was the guy on Knight Rider. But that same David Hasselhoff is a completely different thing in Germany. He's a huge music star. And so if you're doing a game on Baywatch, you need to be careful how much you pay for the German rights, because the German grant of licenses on David Hasselhoff's likeness is going to go through the roof in Germany versus what it is over here. So, be wary of that. Don't go and pay extra for territories that you may not need. I mean, your game may not even be a fit for some territories. So don't go, spending money and paying for what you don't need at the end of the day. Approvals. And this is just beyond important because this can absolutely destroy your game, truthfully. As a developer, you should always have a clause in the contract that sets strict timelines for approvals with the publisher. We're going to send you this build. You're going to have a week to review it, and then you need to send us detailed feedback, and we're going to have a week to fix it. All right. Even in that case scenario, you're talking a minimum 2, possibly 3 weeks before your milestone is submitted and when it's approved. And then if you have another 30-day approval payment from the publisher, you basically submit a milestone day 1, you don't get paid till day 60. The same is true for IP approvals. I mean, they're not paying you like the publisher's paying you a milestone, but you need to have very, very strict timelines in there for their approvals because you're going to have to go through far more hoops and get green lighted from more people with an IP than you necessarily are with a publisher. If you're doing a movie game and the studio has to go through and look at it on their side, and then they have to send it to Tom Cruise's agent for him to look at, you're talking about fluctuating your production schedule by months, not weeks. So you need to be very, very clear on how long it's going to take to get an approval, what their response is going to be, how resubmissions go, all of that sort of stuff. And your producer needs to be keenly aware of that as well, so they can, focus that in, figure that into their, production schedule. Payments and reporting quarterly if possible. It just makes life easier. If you only have to send 4 royalty reports a year, not 12. More and more, because of digital distribution, we're seeing monthly, payment reporting, royalty reporting. That's just the reality of it. If you can get it done quarterly, do it, but just be aware you may need to do it monthly. Trademarks and branding. Yeah, make sure you know what you can and can't use. We've done a lot of work with National Geographic. I know the folks over at the Smithsonian. We'll talk about them and how I managed to piss off the Smithsonian one day. In a lot of these brands, that logo is extremely important. That yellow border for National Geographic is sacred. The sunburst from the Smithsonian is sacred. You need to understand exactly what you can use and what you can't use, and understand the terminology under which you can use them. But also you need to make sure that they're using your logo as well. So if they're promoting this game somewhere, they need to say, this is a game based on National Geographic's whatever it may be, and it was developed by your company. Here we're talking about what I did with the Smithsonian. So you have to be very careful about announcements, even in the day of social, especially in the world of social media now. Make sure that whatever you say has approval. Use their PR team strategically as well, in that you want to make sure, and this is one of the very easy gives from a lot of these, IP, they're going to be more than happy to mention the game on social media because that's a very low impact, job for them. Where it gets expensive is if you want them to start doing commercials and, where they have to get a whole lot of people involved. The reality is a lot of our discoverability in games comes from social media. So it's a huge bonus to go in and get their social media team engaged, and you want to make sure you do it. On your side, be careful. So what I did to piss off the Smithsonian, I sent a newsletter out because the studio that I was working with was going to be working with them to create a game, potentially. But I used the word partnered. which was the big mistake. It's one thing to say, hey, look, we're going to, start working on finding some teams to do some games with the Smithsonian. It's another thing completely to say we are partnered with the Smithsonian to do new games. And that's what resulted in a very angry phone call to me from the head of licensing at the Smithsonian. And we worked it out, and I explained what I did and why I did it. And, she explained why that was really bad. And then I apologized a lot. But if you aren't very careful with what you say and when you say and how you say it, you can do serious damage to your relationship with that company. So just be on the safe side, get everything approved. Say, hey, look, we're going to do the social media post. Is that cool? And then do it after they say it's cool. Don't do it beforehand. So their commitments, and this needs to be very comprehensive because, like I said, there are a lot of times in the industry where we, as the game side of the world, don't speak the same language as license holders and IP companies. So you want to be absolutely very comprehensive. You don't want a line item that says, IP holder promises to do social media. Way too vague. You want IP holder is going to do 4 Facebook posts a week, 2 Instagram posts, 6 tweets. And I just made those numbers up off the top of my head. Don't use them as any kind of factual anything, but that's what you want to say. This is exactly how much you're going to do weekly, monthly, whatever. You want to cover that, through all the stages of cooperation that you're going to be doing it. This is where you say you're going to put our logo in there wherever your logo is present, all of this stuff. But the key is be very, very, very specific on what you expect, because otherwise you can't go back to them and say, well, you didn't help us promote the game. And they're like, well, we tweet about it 4 times, so I don't know what you wanted. You just need to be clear from the get-go. Water break, time out. All right, insurance. And this is something that a lot of companies don't realize they don't expect. You'll see it referred to from the license holders as E&O insurance. It stands for errors and omissions. It basically means if you draw Mickey's ears red and somebody sues you for it, that's the insurance that covers it. When I worked with Nickelodeon years ago, we got a big document of all the things that we could not make Dora do, which just wanted us to make Dora do them because it was hilarious. But anyway, you can't do that. If we had done stuff like that, we would have been sued, and that would have been bad. But being sued this doesn't protect you from being sued by the partner. It protects you from them being sued by somebody else. So you're always going to need E&O insurance, errors and omissions, for at least $1 million. There are companies that are starting to look at $2, $5, $10 million. But generally, if you get that contract back and they say you need E&O insurance, you go, oh, we've already got it for $1 million. 9 times out of 10, they won't make you go and re-up it, increase it. They'll go, okay, because at least you thought about it. At least you have it. Oh, and then I changed the font. So termination. Make sure your deal can't be canceled for any reason, because that's a very good way to just get left out to dry. There needs to be clauses in here that say it can only be canceled for cause, which means you screwed something up or they screwed something up. And then you get a sell-off period. Sell-off periods were more applicable back in the days of botched product, because you would literally have product out there in the market that you couldn't edit it, change it. It had to be, sold basically. But now it gives you a chance to, if you have a month or 2 of sell-off in there, it lets you continue to get revenue from that for a month or 2, so you can get whatever's next lined up. But the main thing is make sure they can't cancel that deal, quote unquote, for any reason. So tips, roadmap of a deal, and then we're going to get into maintaining the relationship. And Brandon, if I'm getting long here, tell me, because I don't even know what time we started and I'm just rambling on. So just on the general level, new and unproven movies or IP can be acquired cheaper. This is called gambling. You don't know that that's going to be a huge success. The reality is, neither does the movie studio, television studio, toy company, whoever. No one knows it's going to be a huge success. So you can generally get it cheaper because everybody's just kind of hoping for the best. An advance on a movie is going to, like we said earlier, it depends on how forward thinking those studios are. Old school companies are going to want more money up front. More forward thinking studios, they're more interested in the back end because they understand more about how games work nowadays. Another thing to keep in mind is, older titles that still have a lot of popularity, that cult classic type thing, or even games, movies that are just still popular. You look at Lego Dimensions, and granted, they were targeting a bunch of our us as parents that were buying stuff for their kids, but you had licenses from Back to the Future, Goonies, and the original Ghostbusters, things that kids today may not necessarily recognize, but parents, as the people who are paying for these things, do realize. So always look at back catalog as well as current stuff. The back catalog can be a little cheaper and a little easier to predict, but that movie studio is always going to be interested in getting you to, do stuff for the latest movie. If you're approached or you're talking to a studio that, is 2 or 3 months from releasing a movie and they don't have a game set up for it, that's a giant red flag. These studios know now that they need to get games in one way, shape, or another set up for their major launches. If they don't, try to find out why, because that's generally not a good idea. You can get lower rates for emerging tech. Voice assisted games, you can go out and get absolute AAA top tier IP now for very little on voice assisted games because no one really knows how it's going to work. No one knows how much money they're going to make on it. And especially the more forward thinking studios are going to be more likely to go, yeah, you know what? You don't need an advance on this. Give us a royalty because they want to see how it works too. It's that simple. If you're looking at TV series, make sure it has at least multiple seasons, and you want to make sure that they've got a commitment for another 1 or 2. And I've had this happen a lot. IP and licensing companies come to us that like, hey, we really want you to do a game based on this series. And I'm like, didn't they get canceled last year? I'm like, well, yeah, but it still has a lot of fans. Yeah, but there's no new content, and so in today's world of live ops and ongoing content, post-launch, all this stuff, you need to make sure that there's a good, long tail of content you can pull from. If you're talking about something like Supernatural that, yeah, it's been canceled, but it also had like 15 seasons of content, you got a little more, leeway there. But, shows that didn't make it more than 2 years and got canceled, be very, 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 very careful with them. And then finally, get creative. We're a creative industry. There are people that think up way cooler to do with games than I do. I'm not going to say this is what you need to do. Use your head, think outside of the box. Use QR codes on, food products and toys to unlock things. AR is finally actually being recognized by the greater community thanks to Pokemon. It's been around for 10 years, but now it's popular. But use those creative assets you've got in your studio to really think outside the box. The more you can do that, and the more you can show that IP holder that you're thinking ahead, that you've got this idea that this is really going to pay off, the better off it's going to be, in terms of you getting the deal and getting a deal that is good, basically. So the research phase, so this is the typical roadmap. So this is to give you an idea of how long these things take. And I've had this entire roadmap take 2 weeks. I've had it take 6 months. So there's no real rhyme or reason to it. Generally, a safe assumption is 3 months from the point at which you start reaching out to the IP holder in terms of getting everything negotiated, get everything signed, get your research done, get a deal on the table, and start moving forward. Figure 3 months. It can be less, it can be more. So research phase, this is where you're using that CRM or spreadsheet if you just do it that way to track and qualify folks. Then you've got your outreach phase where you're going and you're talking to different studios and different IPs, and do this. Do not get, like I said, don't get tunnel vision. Start talking to folks and getting to understand what they want and what they need, and a good feel for the IP basically. Then you're going to be outlining your deal terms. Then you're going to be creating an LOI. Don't make an LOI. LOI is a letter of intent. It's basically the deal you do before you do the contract. It outlines the major points in the agreement, and it's typically going to be the ones we just covered. 1 page is usually enough, 2 pages at most. If you have an LOI that is more than 2 pages, you're basically doing a contract. In the contract stage, that can take 2 weeks to literally 6 months. It's not necessarily because people are going back and forth on deal terms. The more likely reason is attorneys and approvals internally. There's so many. The bigger the IP, the bigger the company, the more people have to sign off on it, and it takes time. And so, like I said, I've got these things done in a matter of weeks before. But yeah, we had a deal that took 6 months, and it wasn't somebody like Marvel that we were trying to do it with. It was a mid-tier entertainment company, and it took 6 months. So, then you got your live phase. When it's starting to launch, when it launches, you've got to, if you've got multiple IPs, you need to be constantly looking for new people. You got to, manage the one that you've got. If your KPIs start coming in and your user base is enjoying something far more than you thought they were going to do, you need to be able to pivot. But, this is the point where the communication is key between your team, their team, PR, marketing on both sides to make sure everybody is on the same path and, everybody's lined up, with the same objectives here. And then reporting, and that's basically the gist of it, when you're sending royalty reports and all that sort of stuff. This is the best I can give you on maintaining a relationship. Plan ahead, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, and be honest. That's the biggest thing. If you're seeing a hurdle come up, let them know. Don't spring surprises on IP holders. They don't understand all the time what it means when the game didn't launch in Q3 because Nintendo didn't approve it. That's not something they're used to. You have to have a very honest, very open line of communication, with these teams, and be ready to explain things. So we had a client at one time, and we were doing a city builder type title, and we sent the concept art over, and they just exploded. They were like, this is complete trash. You have to do it all over again. I mean, just absolute. We were like, what the is going on here? And so when we had the conversation, we're like, what don't you like about this? Well, the colors are completely not our client's colors. It's like, well, this is concept art. This is not final product. If we need to change the colors, that's fairly simple. If you're talking about, you have issues with the architecture or the, thematic elements in the art, that's something different. If we need to change the colors, we can change the colors. But you need to be able to have that conversation and set those expectations of, we're going to send you concept art. This is what you should be expecting. It is not final art. It is not a playable demo. It is not anything other than concept art. You really have to keep in mind that the person that you're dealing with on the other side of this deal may not be as well versed in our industry and how we do things as you are. So don't assume knowledge. Don't talk down to them either, but have that conversation, get a good feeling of how much experience they have with games, and then make sure you're managing expectations and you're being honest, throughout the whole thing. So yes, we can go into lessons learned. Brandon, if you're still there, we can do questions. That's the deck. The next one is just resources we have for developers. So I'll leave that up there in the meantime. But questions?
Yes, and thank you for that, man. That is a department that I feel most game developers need to learn about, as we are kind of, I think, a passion project, and it's something that I actually share a lot with developers out there, where when we do have the financing or the time and the guts to go out there and kind of venture on your own, the one thing that developers, I feel like they fall into a lot, is that now that they have the budget, they just go out there and do their dream project and just pretty much pray until it comes out, right? But like this subject in particular are the types of avenues I feel like developers should look into to kind of learn business and be able to find sustainability and earn the right and everything to kind of venture off on their own. So this is very eye-opening. I'm going to review this myself slide by slide because I think a lot of people got a lot of it through watching your presentation. There is a question here I would like to ask. This is on behalf of HDI Andrew from our Twitch community, and anybody that is watching, we are polling questions primarily from Twitch, but I will be looking at Facebook, Twitter, wherever you are. Feel free to ask those questions directly to Jay here while we have them. This question is, would also love to hear your thoughts on approval clauses. We always try to have that if approval is not withheld in a certain amount of time, the build is considered approved.
Yes. If you can get that, that is amazing. Chances are 9 times out of 10, especially when you're dealing with licenses, they're not going to agree to that because it just opens them up to all kinds of issues on their side. But typically, you're going to want to have the stuff in there that basically says, we're going to send it to you. It's truthfully a lot like a publisher approval clause. We're going to send it to you. You have 7 days or 5 business days to either approve it or unapprove it. If you are not approving it, then you have to give us detailed, instructions in writing on why it is not approved. And in writing means email, not necessarily a letter that they FedEx you that's registered or whatever. And then you have X amount of time to fix it and, resubmit. The time to fix it and resubmit isn't necessarily as pertinent because you're not dealing with a publisher. Well, I'm not going to say that because actually it could be very pertinent if it's like a movie launch or a tentpole event or something like that. But anyway, yes, I love that the approval is if it's not withheld, it's automatically, cleared as approved. Unfortunately, you're going to have a harder time getting that clause with an IP holder than you are with a publisher. Did I lose you? Are we still there?
Yes, I keep forgetting that I mute myself sometimes. Another question, this is from Blank Slate 0227, is about what about making merchandise based on the game, say 3D printed collectibles similar to Funkos?
You still need a licensing agreement. Especially there's a lot of t-shirt companies that do this online. Their philosophy is basically if we sell it for 1 day, they don't have time to send us a cease and desist. And so that's why you'll see a lot of, and I own several of these t-shirts because they are really, really cool. But if you're doing any sort of merchandise based on a game, that is the level of licensing that most licensing agents and most of the licensing executives that these IP holders are going to be familiar with. But that's absolutely a scenario where you have to go and get permission. And, if you're doing it, make sure we didn't touch on this in the lecture, but there are classes of toys and things. You have to make sure that you get, if you want an exclusive or non-exclusive, exactly what classes of toys that you're talking about. And so you mentioned Funko, And that's a good example because, hold on, I'm looking over here at all my Funkos. I'm not the person that leaves them in the box. I take them out and put them on the shelf. So if you notice in your Funko selection, all of your Marvel characters, Star Wars characters, and possibly Disney in general, but I know those two because I'm looking at them right now. Those are bobbleheads. They're the only real bobbleheads that Funko puts out. The reason is a Funko Pop is technically classified as an action figure, and Hasbro or whoever it is owns the exclusive rights to do Star Wars, action figures. So all of the Star Wars Funko Pops have to be bobbleheads. Random licensing factoid knowledge of the day.
That's a good random one.
See, I'm full of those.
So I have not a personal question. I have a question for myself. So we have, so how many, there's a part of the department that is dedicated to looking for developers for IP licensing, right? And I imagine being reputable is a lot easier. You use the example like Insomniac. It's an easier approach. How many of these deals from these developers are kind of, how many are out there for developers who are constantly looking for IP licensing as a stable source of income for them? It sounds like a great idea. It sounds totally reasonable, especially if you're trying to get your own project off the ground, to get a lot of the practice through something a little more safe, like using an existing IP that everyone already loves. But it isn't. In your world, it sounds very traditional, but me coming from...
It's not in games. I mean...
Not in games, okay.
In my world, it is because I've been doing it for 20 years.
You're right.
But the reality is, and this is part of the reason that, we did this lecture, there's a stigma. A lot of people, especially developers, especially smaller developers, assume that if they want to go out and get an IP to help with their game, it's going to cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. And yes, that was true in the 90s and the early 2000s. It's not true anymore. You can get, very good IP that's going to significantly boost, the visibility of your game and your studio, and it's very, very affordable. So, there's not as much as you would think, because a lot of companies, and this is like the slide earlier where I said, don't call them, call them. That's why, you don't want to just randomly call people, because in this day and age, people don't take random phone calls. But the reality is I've secured a lot of IP over the years because I picked up the phone or sent an email, or however you do it, and ask. You don't know until you ask. And the worst that somebody can say is no. So years and years ago, when I was the company that I started before I did the Powell Group, we were a production studio. There wasn't a term for it back then, but we worked with National Geographic and Nickelodeon and Disney and Cartoon Network to create games based on their IPs. They would come to us, but we would actually have an outside studio doing the development. We did the design and the production, and the BD and the business side of it in-house. But we had a partner studio that was actually doing the development of it. And we slowly transitioned that into, doing some of our own IP. And one of the first games that we did, and you have to remember, this is back in the heyday of the hidden object game, the premium hidden object games, not the free-to-play ones. And so I sat down and I'm like, okay, look, if we do an original hidden object game, it's not going to get any traction. I mean, Big Fish was literally releasing a different hidden object game every day of the week. And I said, we got to have an IP. And so, we look at who plays hidden object games. It's women 35 and older primarily. So it's like, okay, so what else do women 35 and older do? Well, they read. Okay, so who are they reading? And I literally got a list of a lot of the most popular authors for middle-aged older women. And then I started calling them and saying, and here's the thing, I didn't call the publishing company. you want to start when you're going and talking to these companies, you want to start as low on the totem pole as you can. And so we started, if you can't start with the actual author, which is the best place to start, then you want to go to their agent. And you can find their agent just by doing a Google search. But, we ended up doing our first game based on a New York Times bestselling author. And we actually had a publisher look at me and went, Jay, I know you've been doing this for a while, but how in the hell did a 3-person studio get a New York Times bestselling author? And I went, we called them. It was just, hey, do you want to do a game? And we had probably 10 or 15 agents go, no, whatever, we don't do that. But we found one where, the agent was like, I love playing hidden object games. Yes, I think she'll love this. And there it went. We did it. If you want to bring an IP in on your game, you can't be intimidated by, the fact that it may cost a lot, or they may not like you, or they may not like your game. I mean, Kentucky Fried Chicken just put out a dating simulator for Colonel Sanders, and it received ridiculous media coverage because it wasn't just we're doing something the same as everything else. They really went off the side of the boat in terms of creativity on that. You got to be able to just give them a call, drop them an email, and say, hey, look, we're making this game. We think your IP would be a good fit for it. What do you think? And then go from there. The worst they can say is no. Then you go to the next on the list.
So I have another question from Blank Slate 0227. What about using homages from movies or other games? Homages. I always mess up on the word.
Homage.
Homage.
I think the H is silent. It's another one of your French words, Brandon. Like de.
De.
I never took French, so I don't know. You could be right on that. You got to be really, really careful there. You're going to get more litigious studios and less litigious studios. The closer you get to it, the more you're playing with fire. There are laws. This is where you need to talk to an IP attorney, not the guy who does the business deals. There are laws that protect public use, satirical use, especially of public figures. Like, you can make a game about politicians and use, very close, if not, their faces, and they can't do anything. Now, our current president will sue you because he sues everybody for everything, but that's beside the point. There's no case against it because politicians and public figures like that are fair game, basically. But a Hollywood celebrity is not a public figure. So it's okay to do a tribute or an homage as long as you keep it within bounds. And it's a very, very gray area. There's no specific guidelines. I would just simply talk to an IP attorney, and the IP attorney is going to always caution you on the side of, getting sued, but, learn to the best of your abilities what those guidelines are. But, the more you start, the minute you take like any kind of official looking likeness or logo or anything like that, at that point you've gone too far. But, just get a good understanding of how far you can realistically go with a lawyer before you do it. That is dangerous territory.
Well, thank you, Jay. This is a very interesting topic, and I've certainly learned a lot from it. And we have like an active Twitch audience that have been loving your particular presentation. And I want to thank you for kind of closing day one on a huge momentum into day two. So this is, I'm going to flash your resource page again for people who want to find Jay and get in contact with you. And I want to...
Yeah, that's all the stuff that we have for developers, basically. And there's our website, obviously. We've got a Discord server. We do the podcast where we do talks like this once or twice a week. Depends on if Indy and I are in town. That publisher list, not necessarily anything to do with licensing. But if you are a developer and you want our list of 500 plus publishers, you go right there and put in your email address and it'll email it to you. And, you know, yeah, I put it in there. But then, and then of course, our networking event that we're doing with you all on Thursday and Friday. But the easiest way, I mean, my email address is down there at the bottom. If you're on our Discord, just hit me up if you've got questions. That's probably the easiest way to get an answer from me because I see it much more often than I do email. But yeah, happy to help. I love that you all do this. So glad we could be involved.
Of course, man. And thank you so much for joining me in the later part of today. And I think we're going to have a roundtable tomorrow as well. So if you want to keep hearing Jay's voice, tune in tomorrow. At the end of the day, we're going to talk various topics about the industry. At least me and you. I think we have pending developers outside of two of us. But who cares? Me and you alone will have a enchanting conversation about what the hell is going on right now. So
dude, we can do that. I love doing that.
Perfect.
So right, well, I'm gonna go get some dinner.
Yes, go eat on behalf of all of us, and thank you for joining us again.
My pleasure, man. Y'all have a good night.
All right, have a good one. All right, everybody. Thank you for surviving with us for gdux.day. Oh my God. .me day one. Again, this is the first of 3 days. Rejoin us tomorrow on our live stream starting at 10 a.m. Pacific time to look at way awesome lectures that you want to tune into. We're going to talk about right off the top of the head. You see these graphics back here. We're going to have Colin Fogel. You know, he's been kind of doing all their comic art for us about his journey. He's been at one point a little fun factoid, my lead at one point in my career, and has been a great influence and mentor to my studies and in my career path, to be honest. And he's going to be joining us for an hour, as well as Jonathan Holmes from Quixel to talk about how photogrammetry, you need to get on board or else you're going to be left behind. And we're going to end the day, again, as I've talked to you guys just right now, with a roundtable discussion with a group and a panel of professional game developers to talk about the last 6 months of news. This is something that I'm looking forward to kind of discuss openly all our opinions about what's happening. So that is it. I want to thank you guys and our sponsor. Let's throw this up one more time before I end the day. Bam! Perforce.com. If you are into version control, and if you don't know what that is, you should go to perforce.com. When you're working within a project, big or small, you want to be able to keep notes and versions of those within a cloud platform so that you don't lose any of your work. You want to go to perforce.com, give that a try. If you're a small team, be not afraid. You are allowed to have 5 users at least and get started completely free. Perforce provides you that. And again, if you are in a studio right now, you've used Perforce before, it can handle up to 300 plus team size. And then Unity.com, our proud sponsor, is the leading platform engine for highest graphic fidelity. Small teams, big teams are using Unity around the world right now to fully realize the game and projects to put it out there in the world. So go ahead and go to Unity.com and give them a like because they'll surely appreciate it. And that, let's do a close-up right here, concludes today's day one. Looking forward to you guys coming back in day 2. I'm going to be refreshed. I'm going to eat and come back stronger than ever. And I want to thank you guys for hanging on with me throughout the day. And hopefully you've gotten a little smarter, a little bit more secure about how to navigate through this crazy industry of ours. And so with that being said, I am out of here. See you guys.